Summon the troops.
Of course. Would the members of the Executive Committee please come to Committee Room 1 for quorum? Would the members of the Executive Committee please come to Committee Room 1 for quorum?
We'll call the meeting back to order, and thank you very much for coming back, one and all. And we're, of course, in the middle of the deputations on the ravine strategy. When I say the middle, we had two that we had done. Now, I have had a request, and this is the kind of deal-making I'm always happy to do. Are you already there? Are you Mr. Jongerden? Oh, how well organized are you, sir? Fantastic. So we'll hear you, and then I did have a request. There was a group that, and I'm always willing to engage in this kind of very positive horse trading. There were 3 people listed from the TRRS, Toronto Ravine Revitalization Strategy, one of whom has to go somewhere, but they have agreed to come, I think, and appear as a group of 3. And on the basis of that, we will sort of move them up to be next after Mr. Jongerden, just because that will actually save us all some time in the end. So we'll do that. But Mr. Jongerden, you are there. And we welcome you, and you have 5 minutes, and please go ahead.
And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for putting an hour between myself and Jason Ramsey Brown, the highly articulate Jason Ramsey Brown. Mr. Mayor, councillors, I am here as the Executive Director of Toronto Botanical Garden. And on behalf of the board, the staff, 1,900 members, and 500 volunteers of the Toronto Botanical Garden, I would like to offer the wholehearted support of our organization to the Ravine Strategy. It is a vision to restore, protect, and provide access to our city's most important natural asset. It's a vision that aligns with Toronto Botanical Garden's mission to connect people to plants, and with our vision to become a botanic garden that is renowned for its display of nature's beauty, but also as a dynamic hub for plant-centered learning, conservation, and research. We commend Council and City staff for your leadership in bringing forward a Ravine strategy in remarkably short time. The interdisciplinary approach from so many city divisions also provides a template for action that will eliminate silos in order to address many more challenges and opportunities in our city. We are particularly pleased that you are embracing in this effort nonprofit partner organizations that are capable of mustering money, expertise, and grassroots support for an initiative so vast and important that governments look beyond themselves for support. You have our support. Implementing the Ravine strategy and creating a viable botanic garden go hand in hand in Toronto. TBG may be the smallest botanic garden in North America. We are the smallest, but we have been working in partnership with Parks, Forestry, and Recreation staff to create a much bigger and more impactful garden that's capable of becoming one of the world's great botanic gardens. People derive tremendous pleasure and serenity from the beauty we create, but TBG will be renowned for its ravine restoration, for its advancement of conservation biology, and for bringing people into an appreciation and understanding of the importance of healthy natural ecosystems to themselves and to all life on Earth. All this occurs under the umbrella of the Ravine strategy. And in consideration of economic development and culture's role in developing the strategy and analyzing its economic impact, we would like to make one more point. Some months ago, when Houston announced that it would give an old golf course to the Botanical Gardens Society for a new botanic garden, city staff conducted an economic impact study that predicted an annual benefit of $100 million per year to the local economy. In Philadelphia, the economic impact of the area's botanic gardens has been measured at over $250 million per year. Our impact will be of this order of magnitude when a new Toronto Botanical Garden that connects with its ravine system is created. And we will be accomplishing this within a visionary framework that you will have set in place. Thank you for that vision, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jorgensen. Now, we would normally, yes, I was going to say I have questions of the deputants. We'll start with Councillor Davis.
Thank you very much. I wondered, one of the previous deputants talked about while the philanthropic approach to funding and investing in our ravines is a good thing to do, there was also concern that our basic preservation of our environmentally sensitive areas was funded properly, and that the implementation of the ESA plans be done in a faster time frame to ensure that we didn't encourage more uses of the ravines before we had actually done the fundamentals of protecting them. So I wondered if you could just comment on that.
It's a question I might like to dodge, but it's a very good question. I was challenged by Jason's observation that given the ravine strategy's reliance to a certain degree on philanthropic support, Yes, is there enough public money beyond the philanthropic support to look after this incredible natural asset? I represent an organization that has proposed to the city that we can fundraise towards creating a wonderful new cultural institution, nature-focused. I hope that that goes hand in hand with general support from government streams of funding. I don't know how to say it any differently. I believe there's room for both.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for coming today to highlight the good work of the Toronto Botanical Garden. I'm glad to see you before our executive committee, because a lot of us, I am, because I'm your biggest fan, that I represent the area you're in, but a lot of councillors aren't aware of your great work. So we look forward to you coming back to Parks and Environment Committee to speak more about that. But I guess my question today related to the ravine strategy, you're really living it every day. You're in the system, experiencing it. How do you think that this strategy will actually serve to highlight the good work of Toronto Botanical Garden, and what are the benefits?
Well, if you go back just a few decades in botanical garden history, we tended to be gardens of display. You know, let's show off the exotic, the beautiful. This changed drastically, radically back in the 60s. We became cultural institutions, scientific institutions focused on plant conservation. So while we recognize that people like to come and look at pretty flowers, okay, there's a basic reason to come, but people also appreciate the serenity, they also, I'm sure, enjoy the health benefits. It's a place where they can learn. So all of those things are part of the mission of a contemporary botanical garden. Where we feel the timing is perfect for us in regard to the ravine strategy is that the whole city understands the importance of its ravines. And I think that we can be a place where people come to learn about the ravines. And if anyone thinks that my interest in a pretty flower might translate into planting such a thing in the ravine, absolutely not. We're about restoring health to degraded natural ecosystems. We're about taking the piece of ravine that goes alongside us at TBG and restoring it. So we're about ecological restoration in those places. We'll have some pretty flowers up on the tablelands next door, yes. But the timing, as I say, is just right for our initiative to become a larger and more impactful botanic garden.
And do you see yourself as a gateway to the ravine system, certainly in that part of our city? Really, you're almost geographically in the center of Toronto.
We
are
are
very close,
yeah,
if not.
Thank you. Yes, we are
The center of the universe. So, would you see yourself as a bit of a gateway? And as you've identified all these wonderful things in your answer, a gateway to all those things, the health benefits, the education, the ecosystems. Do you see yourself in that capacity?
Very much so. If you look at the trail system that it begins at Toronto Botanical Garden at Leslie and Lawrence and allows people to go all the way south down to the lake. North of us, the ravines are owned, a big chunk of ravine is owned privately, so that trail ends at TBG. It goes elsewhere in the city, yes, but that branch of it ends at TBG. We are a gateway for sure. And in that part of the city, there is so much now going on culturally. We like to say that the cultural center of gravity has shifted north and east in our city. We've got the Aga Khan Museum. We've got the Ontario Science Center. We've got ourselves about to grow up, grow into a real and impactful botanical garden. So there's a reason for a visitor to the city to get out of downtown and go elsewhere too.
So can I just ask you, does expanding just seem like the logical next step for your organization, your institution? Is that the way forward, really?
Absolutely. We are the smallest, yes, at 4 acres. There's no reason to have a 4-acre botanical garden situated next to this vast ravine system. I believe we can help people understand it, help people enjoy it, help people to respect it.
Okay, thank you very much for those great answers.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Other questions by members of the committee of this deputy? All right, well, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your being here. So I would propose next to move to Anki Dong, Paul Scribner, and Catherine Burka, all of whom I believe are appearing together from the Toronto Ravines Revitalization Study. And normally, as I said earlier today, what we would do is not give 3 times 5, but we'd sort of assume that you might, since you're appearing together, do something between 5 and 3 times 5. So you can take the time you need, but we're hoping we can kind of just keep things moving along here, and we're not trying to curtail your contributions, but I'll start the clock running and we'll see where we go.
Okay, hang on. Good. Sure.
Okay, so I'll start running now, and thank you very much for all 3 of you for coming.
Mayor Tory, members of the Executive Committee, it's a great pleasure to appear before you today. And I would say on my own behalf that I appear as a citizen of our great city, and I've been a passionate supporter and fan of ravines since my teenage days. And I wanted to introduce the other members of our group, Catherine Burka and Anki Dong. And we are delighted that Toronto is developing this ravine strategy that will guide the city in conserving these living treasures, and they are, and they're known.
Mr. Scribner, excuse me 1 sec. There's a buzz coming from this side of the room. If we could, some of the deputies have even told me they have trouble hearing back there, so if we could have your cooperation. Thank you. Sorry about that.
You're welcome. So we give the city full kudos to in terms of the development of this strategy. It's been long overdue, and we need to conserve these living treasures, these ribbons of green in Toronto, which really distinguish our city from many others. Therefore, we have 3 asks. 1, the internationally recognized concept of ecological integrity, EI, to measure the state and health of ravines should be incorporated in the strategy. Science. We have here in Toronto, of course, U of T, and we have the Faculty of Forestry. And we think the city should be employing their services and centers of research and other organizations like that, which will help address the capacity of the city and its partners to get the job done, because there are only so many staff here, and we are really impressed with the expertise of the U of T. I should just say, in terms of the Toronto Field Naturalist presentation, we do support their point that the real goal here is to keep the ravines in a natural state. Now, I want to take you back a little bit in history, and we'll talk more about these 3 points. But I want to go back to 1975 when my dear friend Dale Taylor and I met at a North Rosedale ratepayers meeting where development was a hot topic. And we were both interested in ravines, and so we realized that if you're going to protect ravines, you have to know what you're protecting. You have to know the dynamics of what's going on there, the changes that are happening, and so on. And this will help decision makers become more strategic. It's nice to say we want to protect our ravines, but if we don't know what's going on, then any strategy we develop is not going to be as effective at all. So back then in 1976, we raised the princely sum of about $20,000, and we commissioned a study of the Rosedale ravines, 3 of them, plus 1 in North York, using the departments of botany and zoology at the University of Toronto. and students led by their professors did the field work, and they cataloged plant and animal life in quadrants in the ravines. It was very scientifically done, and they produced a report in 1977. And it's interesting to note that one of the supervising professors, Bob Jeffries, the late Bob Jeffries, was awarded a Nobel Prize for climate change. He was a precursor of his time. So then in 2015, Dale and I decided to revisit the 1977 study, and we raised $60,000, and we engaged U of T Forestry to do the same work that was done before and more. And the students then, in this part of the study, used leading edge technology. And they produced a study which is action-oriented, is based on very good science. And I would say that they provided their services in a very economical and professional fashion. We enjoyed working with the faculty. As I said earlier, we are very lucky to have this resource in our midst. Anki will speak more to this, but Dale and I were shocked to find the rapid level of decline that's happened to the ravines in the last 40 years, particularly from invasive species. We believe strongly that developing a good scientific baseline is essential for any intervention that will conserve our ravines for future generations. Now, I'd like to introduce Anki, for whom ravines have become a passion since she became involved in their study. She earned a master's degree in 2015 at the faculty through her ravines research, and does presentations on this topic, such as the Ravine Symposium held last year at the Toronto Botanical Gardens. Anki, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a great pleasure to resurvey the Rosedale ravines using modern standards, more specifically ecological integrity. We're glad to see that the draft ravine strategy has recognized our study as an important historic baseline dataset. The draft also considered protect as one of the 5 guiding principles. In order to better protect this 10,500 hectares of ravine land, we ask that the staff report be amended to specifically include the words ecological integrity, university-level science, and capacity. Ecological integrity is the standard framework in conservation and ecosystem management at provincial, federal, and international levels. The official definitions are slightly different, but they all focus on the composition and abundance of native species. Therefore, ecological integrity allows management approaches to be objectively assessed. An example, research at Trent University has found a critical path width of pavement above which bird populations decline markedly. Before planning a bike path or a paved access point in the ravines, we need this type of quantitative study to help us make more conscious and informed decisions. The Faculty of Forestry has been studying the ravines for over 100 years. With expertise and experience, we can help restore ecological integrity in the ravines using university-level science, as we've been doing since 2015 when Eric Davies and I met Dale and Paul during the Toronto Ravine Strategy Open House. We were surprised when they presented us with their pioneer study from 1977, the Rosedale Ravine Study that applied a scientific ecosystem survey 4 decades ago. Their 200-page report provides important quantitative data describing the baseline condition of the ravine ecosystem. Yet there hasn't been any follow-up since then. We knew it was time to resurvey. The data we've collected are depressing, as you can see from the maps over there. In 1977, 10% of the ravine canopy was already covered by non-native tree species. By 2015, it had increased to 40%. Most of these trees were Norway maple, one of the most invasive species in North America. Many of the ash trees have been removed due to attack by invasive emerald ash borer. We also found evidence of beech bark disease that's causing dieback of beech trees across Ontario. Citywide, Toronto has already lost 30 of its 73 native tree species. If this trend continues, in 2050, 60% of the ravine canopy would be non-native species, and the ravine will eventually become a green desert filled with Norway maple, Japanese knotweed, and dog strangling vines. Without an objective framework such as ecological integrity and university-level science, we will soon have nothing to conserve, restore, or protect. The good news is that we believe the ravines are still savable at this point using a scientific approach. You can still see nice patches of habitat here and there, but these small fragments need to be reconnected. Bird surveys conducted with the Toronto Ornithology Club have confirmed that the Rosedale ravines are still hotspots of bird diversity. Butterfly survey conducted with the Toronto Entomologist Club had found a number of hickory hair strakes, a rare species that only lives in healthy hickory woods. We've also mapped 500 large old native trees throughout the Toronto ravines, and our team members and dedicated citizens are still recording. Instead of obtaining seeds from nurseries in Ohio and Oregon, we need to use these old trees representing Toronto's local genetic diversity to restore the ravine forests. While working in the ravines, we've established a strong relationship with many of the adjacent residents. The next presenter, Catherine Burka, is one of them. She has witnessed the decline of ravine health and has the passion to help restore it. The resurvey of Rosedale ravines and the mapping of local seed sources are two examples of how U of T Forestry can help the city restore the ravine health. We ask all of those here today to consider this great opportunity and take steps to formalize the role of the university and faculty as forest experts in support of the Toronto Ravine Strategy. Now I would like to pass it on to Catherine.
Thank you, Anki. My name is Catherine Burka, and I've been involved with the University of Toronto's Ravine Revitalization Study for 3 years now as a ravine plot owner, fundraiser, and donor. I've followed the 6 master's theses with avid interest, from the spread of the Norway maple, the explosion of invasive species, and the loss of small mammals. This seminal research has given us a critical window into the declining health of our ravines. Above all, it has given us an inventory of what is down there. How can we talk about protecting something in the ravine until we first take stock of what we have down there to protect? Protect simply is not a strong enough word. By adopting ecological integrity, we can also objectively assess the impact of this ravine plan, measure what works and what doesn't, and how we can do better. The Executive Committee must realize it's a very lofty goal that you have, striking a fine balance of having this wild, healthy forest in one of North America's largest cities. How do we realistically achieve this balance without university-level science to inform and guide us in our decision-making? So our first recommendation is to redefine what you say when you say protect, and instead use ecological integrity, EI, which is now the standard in forest management all over the world, as your framework for monitoring our ravines' health. Now, in order to do this, to do the science, you need scientists. So our second recommendation is use our scientists in the universities as the specialists to restore ravine health and biodiversity. We have been blessed with this phenomenal urban forest, with streams running through it, rare and endangered species calling it home. We cannot begin to call ourselves a world-class city and manage this unique ravine and ensure its resilience if we don't use world-class experts to guide us. What we have is so much more special than a Central Park in New York. But with the ravine's uniqueness comes fragility, necessitating more complexity and expertise in managing it. Let's consider the medical model, which is absolutely standard, we're all familiar with. Specialists in gerontology, pediatrics, perinatal care, orthopedics, oncology. Medical and academic experts help guide health policy, and it is these individuals that deliver health services to all of us, our citizens. We need a parallel structure in the natural world of the ravines. The foresters, ornithologists, mammalogists, entomologists, etc., to guide us in maintaining the ecological integrity in Toronto's urban forest. Just as medical doctors keep us healthy, We need similar world-class experts of the flora and fauna world, guiding and actively participating in ravine management. So why not use the academic expertise that we have here in the faculties of forestry, faculties of engineering, landscape architecture, soil sciences? We need to use university-level science. Sometimes the city has policies, like with the emerald ash borer, that require some refinement. For a while, we have known that there are ash trees that are resistant to the emerald ash borer. Thus, cutting the resistant trees down not only costs taxpayers unnecessarily, but it erases these genetically resistant trees from our local ecosystem and from our future. No more ash trees in Toronto. We cannot undo this mistake, but we cannot allow mistakes like this to happen again. On private ravine land, ravine owners are a rather confused bunch, and not without reason. The layers of bylaws, the various pieces in the city and TRCA that manage the ravines, voluminous best practice manuals on removing invasives, they all serve to mystify. And we are confused regarding Ontario's 2016 invasive species legislation, which can now fine individuals up to $25,000 for failing to control Japanese knotweed and dog strangling vine. We ask you, is the city compliant with provincial legislation 354/16? The Toronto Ravine Strategy Plan doesn't even mention it. So thirdly, we recommend incorporating the Ontario Invasive Species Act into your ravine strategy. Most private property owners are overwhelmed or completely ignorant of the issues. Neither the TRCA nor the city can address these concerns in full. The Faculty of Forestry has the capacity to deal with property owners, to organize, educate, and engage them in managing their properties cost-effectively with the help of the city's stewardship model.
And I'll have to ask you on that note to wrap up. We're at past 15 minutes now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Every one of you on the executive committee has a very important decision here to make. Don't look back on this moment 20 years from now with regret, when the ecology of the ravines has collapsed and the ravines are merely green spaces with bike lanes, devoid of birdsong, crickets, coyotes, and foxes. We urge you to put more scientific rigor into the ravine strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, do we have questions of these deputies as one? Who's over there? I just see a hand, but oh, Councillor Perks, for sure.
Thank you very much. And I want to start by saying, Paul, it is such a treat to have you come here and be on the same side on an environmental question as I am.
I've always been there.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding clearly. In terms of the work that's in front of us from city staff, is there adequate scientific baseline there for us to even know what we need to do going forward to protect the ecological integrity and biodiversity of our ravines? Do we even have that baseline?
No, we don't. We don't know enough about what's there. There's a lot of work to do, and it doesn't mean putting things off because the job of surveying is big, but it has to start. And so we've shown in a small way that you can do this, and what flows out of the research that was done by the U of T is that you can develop an action plan because things become very apparent. And you and I could walk through a ravine, councillor, and we could say, oh, well, we could see that this is an issue and that's an issue, but you also need the scientific know-how, expertise to be able to drill down.
I've sat down with some of the faculty, and it's unfortunate Sandy and others aren't here today. One of the things that I took away is there's a co-benefit here to the university, which is we could be using our ravines as a living laboratory, a place to train graduate students, undergraduate students in conservation biology. Is that part of the benefit you're looking for here?
Yes, I was going to put that into my presentation, but for instance, our study, our most recent study has employed 7 students and it has been a fundamental a keystone in helping them achieve their master's degrees. Because it's given them practical field experience, the analytical techniques, and so on and so on. And not only that, they didn't have to go far. All you do is get on the TTC and you go into the field.
Sorry,
Please, go ahead.
Sorry, Paul. I just wanted to add to that because Sandy, and we have all spoken at length about that with Sandy, and Sandy wants to get her students out in the field doing real life work and also helping the community, helping citizens as well as helping the city. So that's definitely a co-benefit.
Is there a risk to some of the vertebrate species like birds and so on if we don't maintain the underlying biodiversity of the flora? Is there a risk to those populations?
Yeah, of course there is. That's the problem, big problem with the invasive species, because species like Norway maples and Japanese knotweed, they provide poor ecosystem services comparing to our native species. They don't accommodate many species of birds or insects or mammals. So over time, that's why I said over time, Norway maple and Japanese knotweed will turn the ravines into a green desert.
Thank you very much. This has been very helpful.
Thanks, Councillor Perks. Councillor Davis.
I do recall in this document that there is a process for doing an assessment of the existing health of the ravines as we develop plans by segment. Are you suggesting that doing a base assessment and addressing the specific ecological challenges of those segments of the ravine are not addressed in here?
You want to say something?
Sorry, could you clarify a bit of your question?
I thought you were suggesting that this ravine does not contemplate that we need to have good baseline information about the current state of our ravines.
Right.
That somehow this is ignoring this issue. That we would have academic involvement.
I'm not an academic, but I have seen the academics do their thing in the ravine, and what they do is they take 10 meter by 10 meter quadrants, and they look at every grub and every shrub and so it's very detailed. In this document, it's not clear to me what they're doing, what you plan to do. So we're just saying that there is an element of scientific rigor that we believe is necessary because it's unclear in the document what it is you're assessing and how big these segments are.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
Thank you. To follow on Councillor Davis's question, this may be clear to staff, but it's not clear to us as politicians. The term ecological integrity, you have a very specific recommendation that we embed that term in our recommendations. Is it because that is more globally understood to represent a certain bar in terms of what we might be protecting and how we would be evaluating it?
Yes.
Is that a universally understood term?
Yes, it is, and it has very clear definitions.
Okay. And my only other question then is, you had some very specific recommendations. Do we have that in written form so that we can between now and council, if they aren't all added today, between now and council, we can go through them and make sure that we're aligned? Because you've certainly made the case for the recommendations.
It's a good question. And Councillor, the committee has our copy of our presentation, and it has all those points in it. So if you just take a look in there.
Okay.
And then in council.
Right.
So it's there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Other visiting members of, just before we get to the committee, Councillor Robinson, anybody else visiting with us that wants to question these deputants? Okay, well then we'd move to the members of the committee, and we have Councillor Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. That was an excellent presentation. Clearly, you did a lot of work to build up toward today, so we really appreciate it. I just wondered if you took into account extreme weather events. So I think about the ice storm and the impact it had on the ravines in my ward. My ward was very hard hit in that particular weather event. Have you done any assessment or any analysis of that, the impacts? Because I know not a single tree has been planted, certainly in the ravine systems in my ward, that to compensate for that ice storm that really wreaked havoc on trees across the whole city, but particularly in the ravines. Did you do any analysis of that at all?
No, we haven't had a chance to do that, but in terms of extreme weather conditions resulting from climate change, our seed collection program is something we're doing to prepare for the climate change. We want to collect local seeds so that they're more adapted to the local climate of Toronto, and they have the genetic diversity to combat with these extreme conditions.
Okay, thank you. And just along the scientific rigor piece that you were talking about in the ecology of the ravine, were you consulted at all through the development of what we have in front of us, the strategy we have in front of us? Were you consulted at all or involved in any, invited to a public consultation or asked to publicly or privately submit your findings?
It's a good question, and I believe Eric Davies, who was originally going to be presenting today, but he's ill, from the faculty, a student there was involved in the consultations. So, and it's too bad you weren't able to meet him today. He's quite a guy. He's a well-spoken advocate for the ravines, but we were involved.
Okay, I was just wondering, because you were talking about that scientific piece.
And we'd be keen to be involved on an ongoing basis.
But clearly you feel that there's need for ongoing consultation with the scientific community on this
Absolutely.
front. That's what I'm hearing loud and clear. And then lastly, your diagram, I don't know if you can pull it up again on the green desert with the years as they unfold and the percentages, which is unsettling. So how did you come to this conclusion of this particular chart?
So the data of the first panel, we got it from the old study done by Dale and Paul. And the middle panel, we got the data from the inventory the team did in 2015. And the bottom panel, it's extrapolation based on the current condition. Business as usual. If we don't do any actions on this situation, it will be like this in 2050.
So that's your prediction going forward, based on your previous analysis?
Yes.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Robinson. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for coming and taking the time. And we're lucky to have you and your collective knowledge and experience in the room. And too bad Eric isn't here next time, because he's taught us a lot. So I'm just looking at a couple pages in the report where the one specifically on protection mentions ecological function and resilience, long-term sustainability of the ravines and the watersheds, and ecological health. It also mentions environmentally significant areas. So all that language you feel is not sufficient or sufficient? You're mentioning ecological integrity. So does this language not cover ecological integrity, or?
They partially do, but we feel the term ecological integrity is the umbrella term that includes everything and more of those. And that's ecological integrity. It's something that we can test quantitatively using actual data collected from the field.
Okay. So you would want it seen put in there?
Yes.
Somewhere. All right. And then with the Ontario Invasive Species Act, you feel that that's not mentioned enough, or that you're worried that's not being considered, or?
The act.
Do we want to have it included? So-
You said, for the third point, you asked to incorporate the Ontario Invasive Species Act into the strategy, and I'm assuming staff would do that, but
So I may have missed it. It's a large report, as you know.
Yeah.
But I didn't see any mention of it.
Okay.
So that's why we think it
Okay.
should be.
All right. And then the last one is to include your knowledge and experience using science and whatnot. So with our, we are doing a working group, as you know, right? And on page 42, it mentions the working group, bringing together the city, TRCA, and external stakeholders in the community, including not-for-profit and educational institutions, to develop a baseline inventory of ravine health and improve monitoring and reporting. So I'm assuming that you would want to be part of that working group
Yes.
with
yes.
your, and that would include your scientific knowledge in that. Is that what you're considering?
Yes, we
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Other members of the committee wishing to ask questions of these deputies? If not, I will thank you very much for a very thoughtful presentation and for answering all those questions, and we've learned a lot from it. Thank you so much. All right, going back one, we had Karen Yukich from Protect Nature TO, who is next on the list. Ms. Yukich? Thank you for coming.
Thank
You
you.
have 5 minutes, so please, over to you.
Thank you. I'm making this submission on behalf of Protect Nature TO. We are an umbrella group advocating for the protection of wildlife and natural areas across the City of Toronto. We welcome this ravine strategy and appreciate the effort that went into its preparation. This strategy recognizes, and I quote here, the overarching goal of protecting our ravines by maintaining and improving their ecological health. It highlights a number of activities to support this goal, including the management plans for environmentally significant areas, which have been referred to already, expanded community stewardship programs, invasive species management, and outreach aimed at particular groups, such as adjacent property owners, cyclists, and pet owners, to foster good stewardship practices. To achieve the stated goal of protection, we propose 3 recommendations. Firstly, provide ongoing sustainable funding for the ravine strategy. The 10-year implementation strategy should focus not only on capital plans, but also on a mechanism for ensuring adequate funding for the operational activities identified in this report, many of which need to be funded as soon as possible. For example, 86 ESAs, the environmentally significant areas, were approved by Council in December 2015, aiming to develop and implement management plans for just 3 of them over the next 5 years, which is what's being proposed, is clearly not enough. Similarly, public education to change harmful behaviors in ravines takes time, and it needs to start right away. Number 2, develop a vetting or permit system for work being done in the ravines to ensure coordination and protection of the natural heritage. The report mentions art installations, special events, that type of thing, but it's not only art installations and special events that can damage our natural areas. Other projects, maintenance work, can also cause harm. Protection of wildlife and habitat should be given at least the same priority that is presently accorded, for example, to buried utility lines. And number 3, maintain meaningful, transparent consultation as the ravine strategy is implemented. Community groups, nonprofit environmental and naturalist groups, and local site stewards bring valuable knowledge and experience to the table and should be included in advisory groups such as the ravine leaders and/or other forums on an ongoing basis. Toronto is truly fortunate to have substantial remnants of centuries-old natural habitats in the midst of our highly urbanized city, mostly in our ravines, which support a remarkable diversity of plant and animal life. Nature can be surprisingly adaptable, but it has a tipping point beyond which losses are irreversible. By implementing this ravine strategy and including sustainable operational funding, careful vetting of work activities, and ongoing community consultation, our city has a unique opportunity to get it right. Thank you.
Councillor Councillor Davis, I'm sorry, for some questions.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and for your submission. It's very clear. One of the things that has contributed to the development of this strategy was the ongoing Ravine Advisory Committee. And I understand from speaking with staff that it's their intention to continue that advisory committee. Do you think that is a good way that we can continue to have community input?
I don't know enough about it, and I don't know enough about how much ongoing connection. I think there have been advisory committee meetings and opportunities for input, but I'm not sure how continuous that process was.
Okay.
And it needs to be
ongoing.
It needs to be ongoing. There need to be sort of key checkpoints, if you will, where you can give input at the right time. Sometimes things get too far along, and then it's too late to really change the direction of something. So to be meaningful and transparent are two words that I use, because whatever form it takes, you need to be given an opportunity to give input at the right stage, and for your input to be really heard and help guide. I recently, maybe shouldn't digress, but I recently heard our former chief planner talk about big condo developments and all that, and how when there was community input, the project got better. And I think the same thing can be true as some of these projects pass through local areas where stewards have been working there for years and have an intimate knowledge of that area. They can add information that may not have otherwise come to the table.
Right, okay. And you raise, as well as previous deputants, the need for ongoing funding, and particularly to finish the ESA implementation. And so you said there are 86 ESAs, and we're going to do 3 per year?
The plan here mentions for the first 5 years to aim to get 3 done. Right. And I mentioned that it was passed in end of 2015, so a couple of years have already passed by, and I don't know if maybe 1 has been done so far. I don't know. But that relates very much to what was being discussed a few minutes ago about having action plans in place and knowing what your actual inventory is. That's the kind of detailed work that will go into the management plan. They have to do detailed mapping of what these sites actually contain, why they were selected as being environmentally significant, and how they overlap or intersect with other activities like recreational activities and whatever, where the borders are.
In the ravine.
And all that needs to be in place in order for them to be managed properly. And then staff need to be trained, because it's the ongoing operational staff, the park operations, who are actually there all the time.
Right.
And they need to know when they're next to a natural area, what should they or shouldn't they be doing.
Right. It's interesting to me, you raised this issue around, for me, this question of governance, sort of like who has lead responsibility in the end for implementing these plans that have multiple divisions that all have a finger in the pie. And should it really be the park supervisor whose job it is to cut the grass in the baseball diamond? Is that a sufficient enough kind of, is that an appropriate way to oversee these complex plans being implemented in our parks? Ravine parks.
Yeah, as I understand it, the park supervisor does play a very important role, but they need the right tools. They need to know, they seem to know a fair amount about what they call park assets, which are actual buildings, things like that. They need to know about the natural assets as well and understand what activities might have an impact on them when they need to go for additional approval or review.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Are there other, I don't see any, Councillor Carroll, you're okay? Obviously. Anybody else from outside, inside the committee, members of the Executive Committee wishing to ask questions of this deputant? Well, thank you very much for being with us today. Much appreciated. Next, we have Robert Spindler, Moore Park Residents Association.
Do you guys all a favor and join a group together? So
Oh, that's fine with me.
3 for 1. Okay. John. This is John Bosens, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure if you'll introduce yourselves, then we'll all know who everybody is here, and that's fantastic.
Okay, I'm John Bosens, representing the Summerhill Residents Association. This is Rob Spindler, representing the Moore Park Residents Association, and Joan York, representing Deer Park Residents Association. We're 3 of 5 residents associations that have basically formed a consortium because of our concern about the degrading state of the Vale of Avoca ravine that our residence areas surround. It's just one of many ravines in the city which has basically been allowed to degrade. Rob will show some pictures once I get this computer linked that will illustrate how bad the situation is in our ravine. Joan York will add some additional comments and I will sum up.
You're eating into my time, John.
Put that on hold while you're doing your...
Sorry.
It's okay. No. We'll go fast.
Yep. Okay, this will just title page.
So we thought, and picking up on Councillor Davis's comment about funding, or question about funding, I think our issue here that we wanted to table, the ravine strategy says a lot of nice things. There's, we're totally supportive of the strategy. Hard to take issue with elements of it. There are obvious improvements that could be made that other groups have highlighted. We're here today to say, all well and good, but where's the money going to come from? We've been advocating for ravines for quite a few years now and have learned through working with the various city departments. City departments are well-intentioned, they've got some great people, some great expertise, and they don't have any money. And there's nowhere near enough money that anybody's talking about to actually implement the ravine strategy. If what you mean to do is implement a strategy that will forestall the 2050 event that you saw on that map, the direction we're going, where 60% of our forest is Japanese knotweed and Norway maple. So these are photographs, and I'll just get John to scroll through them to give you an idea of the enormity of the problem, where in this particular ravine, the banks are failing, the slopes are sliding down into the creek, the forests above are slipping into the creek. The work, this is a lot more than just pulling some Japanese knotweed. It's about stabilizing slopes and replanting on a massive scale. You can see here in this photograph, that used to be a trail going through the ravine about 10 years ago. It is now, well, you can see, you probably could walk along it, but not very easily. Another section just to the left of the photograph, the top left corner, you'll see that great bite. The trail used to go right down the middle of that photograph. That was two to 3 years ago. In 2 to 3 years, that bite has been taken out, and that slope is sliding down into the ravine. Maybe power on. Another example, a tree that has tumbled into the creek bed from the slope above. I think there's one of the bridges in the ravine which has been washed out by storm flow. I think, major storm events over the last few years have completely wiped out that bridge. So back to the basic point here, the enormity of the funding that is required. Just wonder whether you guys know or have an appreciation of what is actually out there. Joan, I'll turn it over to you.
Mayor Tory and members of the Executive Committee, my name is Joan York, a member of the Deer Park Residents Group. We moved into the area 5 years ago, and I gradually became aware of the effort by other groups abutting Yellow Creek and David Balfour Park to raise awareness about the deterioration of the Yellow Creek ravine. For many years, our family have walked, cross-country skied in parks around Toronto and environs, and I continue to walk and explore them. When we moved into an apartment in the area 5 years ago, I looked forward to walking in the ravine more. However, I don't do it as much as I would like because it's a sad and dispiriting experience to see it in such a neglected state. As stated in a previous deputation to the Parks and Environment Committee last year, I'm in full support of the initiative taken thus far to raise awareness of the degradation of Yellow Creek. And following our walk with city staff and Councillor Wong Tam in August, a group of people from the surrounding areas have documented the health of the ravine in a very graphic way from 2016 and show the results from the latest storm surges in May and August of this year. I believe this underscores the urgency of the comprehensive approach to tackle this. I've read the draft of the Toronto Ravine Strategy and the implementation strategy and commend those for the huge amount of work that has gone into them. They identified 5 guiding principles: protect, invest, connect, partner, and celebrate. We know this is a long-term project and one that will require money and a coordinated effort. However, with the broad scope and work required by the Ravine Strategy, I'm concerned that the restoration of Yellow Creek will get lost in the shuffle. It will be several years before work on the creek bed and other work can begin. However, I wonder whether some other work could start immediately, and I refer to the reforestation section of the draft submission. The removal of invasive species, collecting seeds, planting and native trees and ground cover, so that as the work progresses, some healthy ravine banks will be emerging. There are knowledgeable people who have expressed an interest in studying the ravine. The other area is education. I believe that this could be initiated with some schools in the area, which would provide an opportunity to engage young people in the stewardship of the natural environment in our city. I believe that the revitalization of Yellow Creek is a good fit with the 5 guiding principles of the Ravine Strategy to protect, invest, connect, partner, and celebrate. This is a personal submission The draft report from the 5 neighbourhood associations will be discussed at the Deer Park Residents Group board meeting tomorrow evening. Respectfully submitted.
If I could just continue. What this really shows is how badly this ravine has sunk down. Now, if we took a look at these pictures of washed out paths, of washed out bridges, this is because this ravine, like so many ravines in the city of Toronto, is neither a park nor an environmentally sensitive area. Instead, it is a storm sewer. The normal flow, as you can see in some of these pictures, is maybe about a cubic foot per second of water. In the storm that occurred in July, we got about 450 cubic feet per second of water. You can understand the difference between that, when you think of it, is that we have something like 15 tons of water per second hitting into a ravine bank like this. It's no wonder that they degrade, that they fall down, that they disappear. And why is this happening? It's simply because the city has grown. Climate change is causing more frequent large storms. And the city has basically sat back like a slumlord landlord seeing, the roof with holes in it and not bothered to do repairs. Now, I understand why. Repairs are expensive. And to do something here, when I do want to give credit to Toronto Water and to Toronto Parks for recognizing that this is a priority, this particular ravine is a priority, and starting a hydrogeomorphic study next year, which will come up with plans for how to deal with the erosion problem. But it's much more than that. I mean, this is essentially a park resource, an environmental resource, and an educational resource for Midtown Toronto. With all of the development that's occurring in the Yonge Street corridor, and we're talking, after all, according to the provincial growth plan, of another 700,000 people in the city of Toronto between now and 2040, where do they go? Where are the parks? If we don't put money into bringing our ravine system back, we will not have the parks. I mean, fine, if you want to say Toronto should be like Hong Kong with very few parks, that's in fact a bit of a misnomer, because actually Hong Kong has the mountain behind it, which does provide parkland. But if you want to say that we should be like, well, better still perhaps, Wuhan or Shanghai, where density is growing so fast that there is very little natural resources left, fine. But the people of Toronto will pay a big cost. We need ravines that children can run in, that seniors can walk in, that people can enjoy. Just as we need more parks in the tableland of Toronto, we need more money to be sent to the ravines. So what we are arguing, we're pleading, please approve this ravine strategy, but please fund it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the collective presentation, and we're going to move, if you are willing, to some questions, and we'll start with Councillor Davis.
Now, I haven't asked this yet today, and I'm sure the mayor may have expected it, but we, of course, have a budget problem at the City of Toronto, and I'm wondering if you're prepared to pay more in taxes than the rate of inflation to fund the very important things like the ravine strategy.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I mean, let's face it. I mean, you have a choice as councillors. You can opt to try to satisfy the people that don't want to pay taxes, and let's remember, nobody really does. But if you do, you're depriving the future residents of Toronto of what is needed to make this an attractive city. And if Toronto is going to be a world-class city that attracts people from outside, that attracts technological firms, that the kind of city that Amazon is looking for as a second headquarters, then you've got to invest in the kind of thing that makes it a great city. And if you just say, well, we don't want to pay taxes, we just won't do anything, then you're basically saying we're not going to be a great city. So yes, I would say yes, we should pay more taxes. As an economist, I would say we should also be looking for more ways of raising money from taxes.
I was actually going to ask that next, which is one of the things that we've talked about is some kind of graduated property tax as a possibility of making those properties that are much higher in value pay a greater share. Is that something you think we should be considering?
I would rather look at alternative tax sources, like tolls, like parking taxes, tax sources that have the particular benefit of trying to redirect economic activity in ways that are beneficial for the city.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, and thank you for caring about your ravine.
Other questions from members of council? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, through you and through the panel. Thank you very much for your presentation. I live on the back of my house, backs onto a ravine, so I know exactly what you're talking about. I just wanted to make sure that it's clear. So you are in support of the recommendation, I guess, save and accept with some additional comments and ideas around recommendations that's been made by some of the other folks who have spoken. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We regard the ravines as multi-use. We think that the ravine strategy is doing a good job of trying to find an organized way of coming to the right balance, which will be different in different ravines. We of course, are very concerned, as was the previous deputation, about the problem of invasive species. I mean, for example, the point was made that property owners would pay fines for an infestation of Japanese knotweed. Well, it's a huge one that's doubled in size just below the apartment in which I live in this ravine. And, the city is not dealing with this kind of problem.
Right.
It's like anything else. If you let things go, they get worse.
And you see the ravines across the city as an asset that contributes not only to the environmental benefits and so on, but from an economic development perspective as well, that it enhances the value of life in the city.
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, a city, I think, is attractive to industry when it's attractive to people.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Other questions of these deputants? Well, thank you very much for a very thoughtful presentation, and thank you for coming as a group. It's helpful to us. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That would bring us to, now there are two, but you're welcome to come separately or together, but it would bring us next to Linda Brett, and I see down below 13 is John Burt, both from the Bloor East Neighborhood Association, but Ms. Brett is actually next on the list. Mr. Burt, I see you're joining her, so that's fine. We welcome you both.
Is it on or is the red on?
I beg pardon?
The red is on.
You're on now, yeah.
Okay. Wait for a minute. Good afternoon, Mayor Tory and the Executive Committee. It's a pleasure to be here to speak on the ravine strategy this afternoon. I have a written report. Most of it's all been crashed, so I will continue as is. We are further down the ravine than the people that just spoke. We represent the Rosedale Valley Ravine from basically Park Road to Bayview Extension, just before that. And we're here to certainly support the report and the recommendations within the report. We're very interested to hear the U of T presentation and also the comments there. We could go on with the degradation of the ravine as it continues in our area, including the bicycle path, shared bicycle path, and 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 also the roadway, all of that. We could go on, but we aren't. Our here is to talk about something that we believe is an issue that was skirted in the report. And although it does not address the actual physical characteristics of the ravine, it's something that we believe that should be dealt with and talked about in conjunction with our ravine strategy. And that takes the form of pictures, and it talks about the human habitation of the ravine, of the people that call the ravine their home. We have 2 bridges within our area. Actually, we have 3, but one of them is Glen Road, which we don't have pictures of, that are in terrible state right now and have been for several years. But I think that in talking about a ravine strategy, you also have to talk about how you deal with the people that call the ravine their home. Do you want to capitulate and take care of them within the ravine and take care of them humanely and with respect? Or do you want to try and move them out, which has been unsuccessful in my lifetime in Toronto? There has to be something to deal with that. Now, we're going to show some pictures, and one of them I'm going to tell you is very graphic, and it may be disturbing. But these are the conditions that we live with and overlook and smell on a daily basis. So this is most of the rest of what I have to say. Just keep going whenever you feel like it, John. See, I covered her face. Some of these were taken last year, some of them were taken this year, but this is the state that you allow your ravine to be in. The resources don't seem to be there to take care of it in a orderly manner. As Mayor Tory knows, and he has responded to a letter, so I'm not going to get into the letter and our requests in the letter, that he is asking for a response by October 8th to many of our concerns. But we believe this is an issue that should come forward and be discussed within the ravine strategy. John, do you have anything you wish to say? Okay. So that takes 4 minutes of our 5 minutes. We had further to say, but we now have some responses, so we will leave it at that.
Yes, and because you're kind enough to come up together, if you want to take an extra minute for Mr. Burt to say something or whatever, but then we can move to questions and you'll have more to say in that time. But don't, you did come together, and that otherwise would have been 2 times 5. So if we can save a couple of minutes, we will do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The main concern, what we've heard this afternoon in the other presentations is most fitting. What we've also heard is that there maybe should be a parks department to look after the plateau, and a ravine coordinator to look after the ravines, and that makes sense to a person like myself. So there's 2 issues. One is coordination and the other one is governance. The other issue is there's massive underfunding and there's no natural state in those ravines. I will tell you that I've been working with all the departments for 13 years, and a warning to those of you who are not going to be standing for election after this year, that Kyle Ray said that in the year prior to him stepping down, that once the bureaucracy knew that he was no longer to be councillor, that no response was being received by the bureaucracy to get work done in the ravine. And therefore his EA said to me, John, you seem to know more about how to get these departments and their heads together than we do. Would you just take over the file? Well, 5 years later now, we come to last year, and we brought together all the department heads or the representatives from the police were informed, the fire were informed, right through to streets to homes, to transportation, And what we see is a massive schism between all these departments. Most of them are willing to do the work, but they don't seem to hand off in an orderly manner. So by the time the work gets to a certain point, the police have to come in on their warrants and then move the people out of the area so that the area can be cleaned. Now we're at a point where a commitment of cleaning the ravine 3 times a year has been dropped back to 1. It hasn't been done yet. And that under the bridges, that they now are in a situation where it's biologically dangerous, and they're going to be asking for a contractor to come in and clean the area before they can do a temporary seal. But 13 years ago, we asked, could the bridges not be permanently bricked in so nobody can have access under the bridges? And the answer was, well, we don't do that, there's no money for it, et cetera, et cetera. And then you get the final point of the community police officer saying to us, well, I don't mind the people living in the valley, but I absolutely object to them lighting fires with car tires under the platform of the bridge. And if you remember that in Georgia last winter, that's how that bridge fell down on the I-85, because people lit fires under the bridge, and the biological hazards that's caused by that smoke is being pulled into our buildings and setting off our fire alarms, which causes the fire department to keep coming, to keep coming, to keep coming. So there's a never-ending cycle without a resolution. And so part of the coordinator's strategy has to be, can you not find a resolution to get the departments to work together to get the work done, and then you as a council fund the work that needs to be done? Because they're now saying to us they're going to make a request to you for the 2018 budget for those bridges to be bricked in.
Well, to be chain link fenced around our bridges with stronger security fences to keep trespassers out. So that's our story. We believe parts of the issues belong within the ravine strategy, and you're also hearing our frustration. In my life, in my term, living over top of the ravine has been 15 years. It's a 15-year struggle to keep on top of and get people out to actually do the cleanups and what have you. People in my building look out of their balconies underneath the Sherburne Bridge. They have visitors from all over the world that come out and look at what you saw of garbage, and that's what they see of Toronto. So that's our plea, and our plea is also to look at how this can work, how we can help these people and work within the ravine strategy to get to some sort of resolution and plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you both, and we'll see what questions there are for you. Okay, well, yes, Councillor Carroll.
So you're asking for a strategy, but you're asking for sensitivity as well. Did I hear that in the first part of your day? You're asking for some sensitivity. You appreciate that sometimes there is no moving people out of a ravine.
Oh, no, we appreciate that. We don't, we're not looking at NIMBY, get rid of them. What we're looking at is how can we coexist with them.
Right, okay.
And if you're going to do a ravine strategy and we're going to coexist with people living in the ravine, that should also be part of the strategy.
Okay.
That's what we're saying.
I just wanted to make that clear, because
we're not NIMBY saying get rid of them.
You may be aware in my area for over 20 years.
No, I've
someone living there who, if we had, with no sensitivity at all, just held her out of the ravine against her will, my neighborhood would have been in revolt because they were actually quite humane about it.
Absolutely not. We're trying to get to a coexisting.
Okay.
And a humane. We're at the point of health problems here.
Yes.
We're at the problem,
you want a helping and cleaning
system. And that's one of our next calls is to the health department, because it is unhealthy. When you have transportation telling you there's nobody in the city of Toronto that's trained, okay, I'll read you. To clean under the bridge, we will need to bring in a private contractor with suitable hazmat gear due to the overwhelming amount of human waste and used needles and other personal belongings and garbage, which are in a relatively confined space under a portion of your city's bridge.
Right. Okay.
And such cleanup is beyond the training and capabilities of our staff. We are currently obtaining quotes to do the work. Now, those conditions have been there for 15 years. I mean, they get cleaned up periodically, but they are reoccurring conditions. So if the city had some way of even providing garbage cans.
Right.
There's not one garbage can down there.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your coming today and sharing those oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Davis. Apologize.
So you mentioned the word governance, and I guess that means who's responsible for ensuring ongoing maintenance and or implementation if we have a management plan for a ravine. Do you have any ideas about that from your experience?
Well, we sat down with, I don't know how many department heads.
Yes.
They talked about how they coordinate, but there doesn't seem to be a central person that makes sure that it all gets done. We have responses from forestry that said, well, we couldn't get everybody together, so we did our pieces of the property. As you know, there are many partners in the ravine.
Right.
And it is very complicated to do the cleanups.
Yes.
So you really need somebody over top that's going to that's over top of each of these departments is going to project manage it and make sure that it all gets done properly. And I know parts of what we believe happened this year is that resources got pulled elsewhere. You had some disasters we had down at the waterfront and what have you, and the people that do us do them as well. So they get pulled away. It's not high priority. This one's a higher priority. And so we've been neglected more than usual this year.
So have you had, I know in our park, and I moved a motion to develop a management plan, a Taylor Creek master plan and management plan, and I think kind of kick-started the ravine strategy, but we have, 5 different divisions, all have a stake in that park and ravine, but they did not seem to be coordinating. But part of my interest as a councillor was to make sure that there was a plan of even, scheduled improvements or a way that we could identify the kinds of improvements and or maintenance issues that needed to be overseen and monitored and implemented on an ongoing basis. So like a real plan that somebody was responsible for. Is that something that you're looking for?
It would certainly be helpful. Certainly we've been working diligently with Councillor Wong Tam's office, and it was her office that pulled together the ravine. But you also got to realize how many other parks and the ravine spaces that Councillor Wong Tam is also looking after and trying to advocate for. So it's a very labor intensive. And what your suggestion is possible, and we could take it back to Councillor Wong Tam.
Well, I think that's what this strategy is about. How do we develop management, coordinated management plans?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Both of you. And that would bring us then to Robert Wallace, Outward Bound Mailing Canada.
Came from in Outward Bound Canada.
You can take that off. Not part of your name. It's not part of its name.
So I want to thank you, Mayor Tory, and the members of the Executive Committee. I'm not sure if it's as exciting as it is for us in this deputation process, but it's a wonderful process, and thank you for taking the time to listen to us all. The deputations have been great this morning, and it's a testament to the importance, I think, of the ravines for this city, on how many deputations and how many different interests there are in the ravines. I work for Outward Bound Canada. We're a not-for-profit organisation, a charitable organisation that's been providing educational experiences outdoors for 75 years and for 50 years in Canada. We're experts in risk management, travelling through the land and introducing students to the environmental issues and their impacts on the environment as well. And since 2010, we moved down to the brickworks, right in the heart of the ravines, which has been imperative for us to work with newcomer Canadians, with individuals with mobility issues or other health issues that mean that they can't access areas like Algonquin Park, for example, which is where we would traditionally program. Our biggest impact on students' learning and growth is our overnight programs, our overnight expeditions, and it's the journey. And with 300 kilometers of trails within the ravines of Toronto, that's a great resource to make programs more accessible. However, we found that our access to the ravines has been restricted by city bylaws and policies. I wholeheartedly support this ravine strategy and hope this is the first step in increasing this access. But one thing is missing for us is extending that time in the ravine, i.e. leave no trace camping. I want to change your view of camping here. For us, camping is not with trailers and RVs, with gas canisters and barbecues and huge fires, with garbage destroying the land. For us, we abide by 7 leave no trace principles. And that means we have a minimal impact on the land. And what better way to teach students to protect the delicate infrastructure of the ravine ecosystem by learning exactly what our bodies need and what we need to take care of to leave no impact. And that means carrying everything out and everything in. Imagine a ravine system that has invested in designated spots for small groups, moving through the land, connecting the ravines on journeys using human power, from Oak Ridges Moraine to the lake, boarding canoes and traveling to Toronto Islands before traveling to the Humber Ravine. We've partnered with the TRCA and the Rouge National Urban Park to provide joint programming, for example, for our students as they complete their urban discovery, high school credit, and what better way to celebrate the ravines. However, the city at the moment has a blanket refusal of camping of any kind in the ravines. There is a precedent for allowing camping in Canada. The BC Supreme Court, guided by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, have recently allowed camping in and around Vancouver. And in Toronto, youth-serving not-for-profit groups are able to camp on Snake Island, but there's no connection within the rest of the ravines. It's a hugely impactful experience for our students. So the ravine strategy is a much-needed boost for Toronto's greatest asset, but please consider working within Bylaw 608 in conjunction with the ravine strategy, allowing camping in Toronto ravines. There's no reason why small, leave-no-trace style camping expeditions managed by recognized leaders in risk management and adhering to strict guidelines can't occur within the ravines, which has positive effects for all 5 of the ravine strategy's guiding principles and teaches our students to protect, invest, connect, partner, and celebrate our ravines. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wallace. And there's some questions from members of the council. We appreciate that. I think there's going to be more said about that perhaps later on, but we appreciate that very much. Thank you for being... Oh, you did have a question, Councillor McMahon, okay.
Thank you very much for coming down, Robert. That was interesting. So can you just tell me the ages of your campers?
So high school age, so grades 9 to 12, 14 up to 18, 19.
And they get a credit, or they just get the experience, or?
We are a school. We're inspected by the Ministry of Education. But there's, depending on the length of the program, our programs go towards high school credits. But we've been working with the TRCA and with national parks to develop high school credits that really get to the core of discovering Toronto, working through the Humber Ravine, working from the history of going down from Bolton all the way through the Humber River down to the lakeshore.
And how long is a typical stay?
It would be a single night.
One night.
Single night, but traveling through.
And you've done it before in the Rouge, or where have you done it before?
We're restricted just to the Glen Rouge campground, but we're working on the management strategy for the new national park to have some backcountry campgrounds throughout there. We've tried to connect with the zoo and with TDSB sites throughout there to have other overnight spots as well.
Okay. And can you tell me a little bit more about this leave no trace? Because I
So
like
Leave No
that
Trace has
for everything.
7 principles, and generally it's making sure that a campsite is better when you leave it than when you arrive. So making sure that it's on durable surfaces, making sure that even the food that we eat is not on fires that will leave any trace at all. It's using equipment that will help you leave no trace. It's bringing all your water in. It's taking all your waste out.
So like reusable containers and things like that, Paul?
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
Be great to have that for visitors too, not just campers.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much then for being with us. Much appreciated. Mr. Wallace. Mr. Robert Buxton Potts from Evergreen. Oh, I'm sorry. Miss Robin Buxton Potts. Welcome, Ms. Potts, and 5 minutes are yours.
Thank you very much. And as Mayor Tory mentioned, I'm with Evergreen, so I actually get the privilege of watching some of the kids play with the Outward Bound programming. I get to work down at the Brickworks, which is a huge privilege and part of why Evergreen is here today. And so on behalf of Evergreen, I wanted to congratulate you as the Executive Committee, City Council, and staff for this landmark report in support of Toronto's incredible ravine system. For those of you that don't know, Evergreen is dedicated to making cities flourish. Since 1991, we've been hard at work transforming spaces into great places so that communities can thrive. This is evident in our work designing school grounds, building community programs, collaborating on transportation, housing, and water issues, and imagining and developing the Evergreen Brickworks social enterprise. Since 1991, Evergreen, a Canadian charity and international thought leader, has provoked bold action in transforming public landscapes into thriving community spaces with environmental, social, and economic benefit. At the core of our work is the belief that involving people directly in the process of restoring the health of local ecologies and their communities positively affects the attitudes and behaviors that lie at the core of the sustainable city. So Evergreen has been deeply involved with the strategic planning and conservation projects in the Don River Valley, and we are thrilled to see this report, which provides an intentional and coordinated framework, vision, and approach to the management of Toronto's ravine systems for the first time. We've heard at great length today about how Toronto is one of our greatest assets. The ravine system touches nearly every neighborhood in Toronto and provides opportunities for recreation, learning, relaxation for millions of residents. And as our city continues to grow and densify, the ravine system offers a shared backyard for millions of residents. We believe the adoption of the ravine strategy is a crucial step in increasing access to the ravines while protecting its natural ecosystem, and plays an important role in mitigating impacts and risks from climate change across the city. Mostly, the ravine strategy provides the City of Toronto the framework to take bold steps by investing in specific ravine enhancement projects such as improved access, new public spaces and parks, natural feature enhancements, and conservation efforts. We understand that the maintenance and improvements of our ravines and the physical infrastructure located within them is crucial, and that a city with competing financial priorities, sustainable financing can be challenging. Many deputants today have highlighted the need to identify funding to meet this great challenge and great opportunity. The recommendation to convene a table of ravine leaders is one such opportunity to partner with and leverage private philanthropic support to catalyze third-party investments in the system, as well as support actions to celebrate this unique and precious asset. This kind of philanthropic support, in conjunction with sustainable city investments, could help speed up the overall investments in the ravines, including timetables for the ESAs and the need for increased ecological protection. There are precedents within the ravines of this kind of shared governance structure that have been met with tremendous success, as evidenced by Evergreen's leadership on the Don Valley Park Art Program and Evergreen's partnership with the City of Toronto from last weekend's Ravine Days. We've seen firsthand that a shared working model with community leaders from the municipality, not-for-profits, and others come together. We have great success. There are also worldwide examples of successful private and public partnership models for park maintenance For example, the Central Park Conservancy is a private nonprofit organization that manages Central Park under a contract with the City of New York. Since its founding in 1980, the Conservancy has invested more than $800 million USD towards the restoration and enhancement of Central Park. With contributions from park area residents, corporations, and foundation, the Conservancy provides 75% of the park's $65 million annual operating budget. We believe that a Ravine Leaders Roundtable could be structured to acknowledging the ravines as a culturally significant landmark in Toronto, akin to the Toronto Centre of the Arts and other city-owned cultural centres, as well as being a natural landmark in the city. The ravines are a cultural and historical landmark. They tell the story of Toronto's history, but also Canada and the world's history. The ravines are a place to celebrate and learn about Indigenous historical and current usage, to the somewhat controversial legacy of Ernest Thompson Seton and Charles Sorrell. The ravines also provide the backdrop for Coleman's research into the, and I can never say this word right, Pleistocene of the Toronto region, and one of the very few sites where climate change and the environment can be studied between the last two major glaciations. So we know these models exist, and finding the right one will be crucial for the long-term success of our ravines and city. As with everything, the devil will be in the details. Decisions around the structure and management model of the Ravine Leaders Table will be paramount. We hope that it will create a clear partnership with the City of Toronto, provide clear directions around the membership of the table to include the diversity of ravine stakeholders, and clear outline to balance the increased access and animation of the ravines while maintaining the ecological health of this incredible asset. So I urge you and the Executive Committee to support the recommendations outlined in item 8 and reconfirm your support for a thriving Toronto ravine system.
Thank you, Ms. Potts. We have some members wishing to ask you questions, starting with Councillor Carroll.
Thank you. I just want to be clear, because as you know, we don't really have, well, I was going to say robust, but we don't actually have a conservancy model, full stop, at the moment, such as they have, fully developed in over a couple of decades in some other cities. But I'm trying to understand, you're not proposing that we set up an overall, a mega conservancy that oversees the whole strategy. You're speaking to it as a part of.
Yeah, just as the recommendation to set up this Ravine Leaders Table and see what that looks like for Toronto. I think that a Toronto solution is going to come out of this, but that we really support this idea of bringing in other stakeholders to talk about what this management and philanthropic support of a ravine strategy would look like.
But the prioritization framework, things like the monitoring, the study that's been recommended today, and prioritizing city spending, so there are real public dollars and public stewardship going into this. You're not talking about replacing that. You're talking about, as they go through their process, the model may work as components.
We see this as a way of supplementing and working together. There absolutely needs to be dedicated funding from the city to help, just to help philanthropic donors know that this is something that the city takes seriously, to enable that kind of donation, and so that the city has its own structure that we would add on to.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Davis.
I'm going to go back to this question of governance and management. So you're suggesting, though, that there might be a model in which a ravine, an area would be managed by a third-party arm's-length conservancy model or something similar? Is that?
Potentially. I think it's something that is worth exploring as a way to help fast-track the need to preserve this incredible asset. I think the recommendation for a Ravine Leaders Table to start talking about alternate models is a really good thing. I have no real sense of what that would
So that's your idea, that's your understanding of what these recommendations mean. It's not just looking at fundraising, it's also looking at potential third-party governance of our ravines.
I think it's necessary to integrate them a little bit. As some of the other deputants mentioned, it is harder to fundraise money for pure ecological maintenance things. But if it was part of an overall strategy, I think you could end up doing that. And so looking at other models that would allow, the problem is so big and the work that we want to do is so grand that I think that It's unlikely that in the next 2 years, this city will fund it properly, so a way of working together.
There's a difference between fundraising and management and governance. And I guess I'm sounding worried because I am. If this is the direction this is going, it worries me a lot. So I can understand fundraising and potentially philanthropic donations for some special features somewhere, but not management. So is that the position of Evergreen?
We would like to see that option explored.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Davis. Councillor Perks.
Thank you. Over here. So you heard the presentation from the University of Toronto, I assume. And I was wondering, do you share that sense that the job one has to be establishing an ecological baseline so that we can figure out, where limiting factors and stressors are that could cause significant ecosystem loss?
Absolutely, and I think that they should be involved in the creation of the ravine table. We see it as all of those stakeholders need to be involved, and that we could help fundraise for that kind of work.
Okay, and that's actually the second thing I wanted to ask you about. You made a comment in response to Councillor Davis that I wasn't sure I understood. You said that fundraising for that kind of science is harder than for other kinds of things. Did I hear you right?
That has been our experience.
Yeah.
While we have tried to fundraise as an organization in the Valley system, that people are more inclined to support things that sort of look flashy, but you can partner those things that say, yes, we're absolutely going to do this great art installation, but as part of this package, it includes funding for this research, this ecological maintenance work.
Right. Now, I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting my chickens and eggs in the right order here, but I think what I heard from the U of T is we have to have the scientific baseline up front, and I think the reasoning for that is pretty clear, that if you don't have that and then you start putting in recreational uses and more intensive uses, you could be unwittingly doing irreparable damage. So I'm a little concerned that if you're, well, we'll give you, a new campsite that's all flashy, and I think flashy was your word. Over here, if you'll pay for science that comes down the road, we're not really getting things in the right order.
The way that we, as Evergreen, understood the structure of this ravine table would be that people like the U of T group would be at that table to have those conversations and make that decision collectively. I don't think that the idea is to put one thing over the other, but to actually have a really robust consultative not even management, but advisory service around how projects are picked outside of the city's framework to allow for this to speed up and to really meet the vision that I think everyone has demonstrated we want to see for the ravines.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. And just to see if there's questions of any members of the committee other than the ones you've just answered from councillors. Okay, well, if not, we'll thank you very much, Ms. Potts, for the deputation and for your answers to those questions. And that brings us to the last of our deputants, Gary Brick. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor Tory, and the Executive Committee for giving me the opportunity to talk before you. I apologize for my appearance. I'm running between meetings and wanted to be here, but I guess one of the meetings we're doing is we're organizing protests in Charlie Park to with regard to the Charlie Hill Trail that's being built by the city. And you can ask, oh, she's gone. If she wanted to ask me questions about budgets, I'd be happy to answer this. I'm a bit of an unusual guy being here in that I grew up in a small town in British Columbia, son of a Second World War veteran who probably lived most of his life with post-traumatic stress disorder. When my older brother and I were graduated from high school, my mom packed our bags and said, "Get on the train, you're going to UBC, and come back when you graduate." And so my older brother became one of the leading water resources civil engineers in North America. And as a result, I think I have learned by osmosis a fair amount about water resources over the years. I wish he could be here today, but he unfortunately is on his way back from Brazil from his last posting, and it's actually going to be here next week. For my sins, I ended up graduating and becoming an investment banker, and lived much of my career overseas, and had the good fortune of being able to translate foreign currencies into Canadian dollars for a period of time, and was able to afford to buy a house in North Rosedale. I was really attracted to the area because Charlie Hill was there. It's an environmentally significant area as designated by the city, and it really made me feel like home where I grew up. So I really enjoyed the opportunity to move into North Rosedale. What I want to say today with regard to the ravine is that, after Hurricane Hazel in 1954, studies recommended ways to protect the ravines and water systems that run through the GTA. The most visible result was restricting building in the ravines. Also importantly, the Commission recommended that 15 flood control dams be built in the northern part of the GTA and beyond. To date, only 3 of those dams have been built. There have been some other remediations done to try to regulate flow of water as it comes through the GTA, but 12 of those dams that were recommended in the 1950s have not been built yet. And that does create some risks because when Hurricane Hazel was over Toronto, they measured the height of the water in the Don River, and it was 25 feet up the bridge abutments on the Bloor Danforth bridge. So you can imagine if we had buildings in that area, what would happen. So over recent decades, the province has put protections in place to protect the Oak Ridges moraine from being paved over, to protect the water systems flowing through the GTA from surges and drying. The philosophy or the science is to view the Oak Ridges moraine as a sponge. That is, to let water seep into the soil to allow it to go through a process of slow release into water systems as pure water released over time, and reduce surges and also maintain continuous flow in our streams that go through the GTA so they don't dry up. It's a very important policy. At a more micro level, the City of Toronto is pushing ahead with many policies to pave the GTA. More roadside curbs and sidewalks with parking lots and storm sewers. Low enforcement of proper downspout disconnections from buildings. A new policy to widen sidewalks to 2.1 meters. And sealed roads with curbs and storm sewers to get water off the city as quickly as possible. As an example of some of these policies, on my street in North Rosedale, the city sealed and repaved our street with curbs and storm sewers. Interestingly, 6 months later, the city sent us brochures asking us saying that their trees were thirsty and to please water them.
I could ask you to wrap up pretty shortly. We're just past the 5 minutes now, Mr.
Yeah. Okay. So what I want to really say is, the rationale. We need a rational ravine strategy with new macro thinking. The city needs to make sure that it controls water in the ravines in both quantity and quality. And secondly, the city needs to enact policies that view the GTA as a sponge, which would encourage water to be absorbed into the ground where it is naturally purified, rather than an umbrella policy, which the city currently follows.
All right. On that note, sir, we're at 6 minutes now, so
okay.
Thank you. have to be fair to all the other people who stuck to the 5 minutes. So do we have questions for this deputy? All right, well, thank you very much for your patience and for your submissions today. Appreciate that.
Can I just respond to this councillor?
Well,
she was asking about budgets.
I'll give you 20 seconds, and then we're going to. All right, Councillor Karygiannis is over there, and he wants to ask you a question.
So the city is determined to build.
Sir, she didn't actually. Councillor Davis didn't actually ask you a question, but Councillor Karygiannis is going to, and so he may give you the chance to do what you want to do. Councillor Karygiannis. Oh yeah, you can.
Thank you very much. With regard,
Councillor Karygiannis is over there, and he signed up to ask a question.
Hi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the deputy. Is there something, sir, that you left out and you haven't told us, and you think it's important for us to know?
Yeah, that's a question. You know, well, just say, Councillor Karygiannis, I just was trying to be fair to all the other deputies who've had 5 minutes, and he had 6. I gave him an extra minute. Yeah, that's all. So, because the implication of your question was he'd somehow been unfairly treated. I've been treating people very fairly all day,
Sorry,
as I always do.
Unfairly treated him. I just said to him if there was something else that he
Thank you, Councillor Karygiannis. Mr. Brick?
Yes? Can I respond to him?
Yes, please do.
Thank you very much. One of the things that I did want to say is that as a result of this policy of paving the GTA, the water systems of the inner city are more like open sewers today. Water is running off of the streets through storm sewers and bringing all forms of waste into the ravines. And there are ways that other progressive cities are using to try to purify that water before it goes into the water systems. And I don't think I've heard any of that thinking over the last few years in the GTA.
Okay, other questions for Mr. Brick? Okay, Mr. Brick, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of deputations for item 27.8, the ravine strategy. So we would now move to questions of staff. I'll just do members from not on the committee first, Councillor Pasternak. So we have Councillor Davis, Councillor Carroll.
Of course, I have 9 questions in 5 minutes, so I'll probably have to ask them later. Will the Ravines Advisory Group continue to meet in the development as you develop the implementation strategy?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it will.
Okay. The issue of baseline data, I think it says in here that part of what will happen in one of the 10 priority areas that are selected is the development of baseline data that's specific to those areas. Is that the way the baseline data is going to be developed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. There is a recommendation around developing the baseline data, and Mr. Geronimo would like to add to that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in addition to that, Toronto Water would continue with the geomorphological studies that look at the ravine or the water courses and the way they've moved over the years.
So your geomorphic studies that you are doing on the ravines are going ahead independent of these 10 priority areas that are going to be selected?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in the past they were going on the priorities set by Toronto Water with the ravine strategy. In fact, we now have a framework to have conversations with the other partners to potentially reorder our priorities and do the studies in coordination with other divisions.
Or you're the guys with the bucks. You probably will be the dog, not the tail. But anyway, what I want to ask specifically about the Taylor-Massey Creek master plan and management plan for the park. Those are going ahead, and they will be separate from 10 additional priority areas? I heard yes earlier from staff.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. They will continue to go forward as planned prior to this strategy coming forward even.
Great, because what I see here is very similar to what we're doing, and I kind of get the feel that what we're doing in the Taylor-Massey Creek Ravine strategy and management plan is going to be kind of a pilot for what is envisioned in this strategy. Is that fair?
That is absolutely fair. We would consider that to be a pilot around the types of initiatives moving forward through this strategy.
Okay, that's great. And I wanted to ask about the recommendations that pop out attached to this report. There's one tiny part of the strategy that talks about partnerships and working to look at with philanthropic organizations, particularly for fundraising. And then there are the recommendations about setting up a table, the partners table or whatever it's called, the ravine leaders, and to work with an organization. Could you tell us more about this? Are you envisioning that we are going to look at a conservancy model, as we heard from Evergreen today?
So through you,
a governance structure about managing our ravines?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, two separate questions really. The first around philanthropic interests, and the recommendations in this report here today speak to the need to create a new philanthropic table specific to the ravine strategy that would look very specifically at items connected to the ravine and would be as far-reaching as possible from a stakeholder perspective, with a very specific fundraising goal towards specific projects in the ravine system based on the strategy. The second question around whether we're looking at various management models and conservancy models, we already have a few different models that are operating within the ravine. Evergreen Brickworks was here today. They're a good example of a stakeholder that is operating within the ravine system and doing some work in partnership with the city and also on their own as with their own status. Mr. Jorgensen was here from the Botanical Gardens. It's another example of a different type of arrangement that we have groups working in the ravine system. So we will continue to look at various arrangements. And I think the stakeholder table that we have as recommended in this report will make those discussions certainly more transparent and more available to a larger network of people.
But we're not talking about a conservancy model for managing our
The entire ravine system? No, we're not.
Not the entire ravine system. There's 6 of them, but large. We're not talking about the natural environment being managed by some third-party conservancy.
Not through the recommendations in this report, no.
That was a final question. Thank you, Councillor Davis.
I have another one.
Okay, that I had next was Councillor Carroll.
Yes, just a quick follow-up. I think they're the TRSS, the group that spoke with Mr. Scrivener. So their specific recommendations, is there any impediment to setting that standard? Is the strategy built on such a foundation that it would be easy enough to zero in on a standard like that?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, there are recommendations in the report, in the strategy, that speak to the 3 recommendations that the University of Toronto brought forward. And some of them have been referenced already. On page 2, we speak to partnerships and involving educational institutions around that ecological metric, so to speak. And we also speak
so to speak, but they're asking us to be more blunt about it. Is there an impediment to being more direct and actually saying ecological integrity instead of environmentally sensitive areas?
Our intent is to work, first of all, with the system that the TRCA is using around ecological integrity, and to include as much stakeholder input into how that might be changed.
Right.
You know, through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't have recommended in the report to adopt a different model than is currently being used, but we can certainly have a look at that model and see how it fits in with the work that we're doing with TRCA.
So an executive member might want to move perhaps a briefing note between now and council or something. Well, actually, I see a member's going to take this up in some form or other. So I'm done. I only have one other question. A prioritization framework is something we're starting to see far more often than we see the words implementation plan. The prioritization framework, here's some things we'd like to do and here's the time frame we'd like to do them in, but you're not actually asking council to commit to a time frame and an implementation plan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll start that and ask my colleagues to add to it. I think the first idea around a prioritization framework is we've never had a list of priorities in the ravine system before. And we've never had criteria that identifies those priorities. So I think that is a good first step in this strategy around identifying those things. The next step is then working collaboratively, as we do within divisions, around how we can move forward on some of those priorities. So that would be the first step that we're considering in the plan, and I think Lou wants to add to that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just to continue, the next step, Mr. Mayor, would be then sitting down with the team and using the framework as approved by council to start that implementation plan. That is the challenge. You cannot build an implementation plan without having clear priorities, because otherwise you have competing priorities from different organizations. This plan helps us align those priorities, and over the next few years, staff will be able to sit down, present their various programs and potential projects, and start aligning them up, and you have now the development of an implementation plan with a long-term capital plan. So that is one of the recommendations, is to start building that plan and bring it forward.
But the partnering and the baselining and agreeing to a standard, it's well and good to partner up. But if council wants to say, here's what has to happen in our ravines within 20 years, they're going to have to nail that down and vote to say, let's pick a year and be done in 20 years. That's not what the prioritization framework as a step actually completes unless council gives you that direction.
I think you'll get that once you start to see the capital plans that staff put together and come forward out of this framework. Those discussions could then happen with council. They would see the order priority of projects, and if council then wants to influence some of those priorities, they can then do that, and staff could go away and look at the implications of doing that, from budgets, costs to timing.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thanks, Councillor Carroll. I think that's it for, Councillor Perks. You're up next.
I believe this is to Parks, Forestry and Recreation. Council at some point, and forgive me for not recalling the details, I'm usually better than that. We approved a number of environmentally sensitive areas across the city where we were supposed to develop management plans.
It's actually through planning, so I'll ask.
It's through planning, sorry.
That's correct.
Yeah, and we approved 80 odd of them, yeah? How many of them have management plans as of now?
Through the mayor, there's about 8 management plans that incorporate about 8 ESAs so far, and plans to, in addition to that, we have detailed information on each of the ESAs that were done as part of the original study, and we've done more detailed work on 57 of those. So we're in a good position to now start to actually develop the management plans, and we've identified starting with 3 for the short-term priority.
3. And how many, just roughly, if I recall the work, and honestly, I'm stretching trying to remember it, a very large number of the ESAs were in our ravine lands. So we have plans in place for 8. You're planning to do 3. And so I'm just curious, if part of the strategy we're discussing here involves intensification of uses, how do we do that prior to having the management plans in place?
You know, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the identification of the ESAs is a first step because it protects those lands from a number of things as their status as an environmentally significant area. So I think, as with all of the recommendations in this plan, we try and balance as much as we can around all of the uses that people want. Certainly the identifications of those ESAs would be a foundational piece around usage in various parts of the ravine.
Do our management plans reach the same standard as the EIs that the University of Toronto deputants were talking about today? You know, all the ecological baseline work, the multidisciplinary stuff across a range of ecological sciences.
If they use the best, sorry, through the mayor, the best research and information that's available, and they go out in the field.
I appreciate that. I would never doubt that we would do the best, use the best information available. What I'm asking is there are recognized approaches that are used globally. I'm familiar with them. I've looked at them in other contexts where you study the ecological integrity and it's multidisciplinary. Do our management plans for our ecologically sensitive areas meet that standard?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think we're still waiting on an answer, are we, or? No, we're not. Okay, thank you. Okay, that's all for you then, Councillor Parks? Thank you very much. Other visiting members? Okay, if there are none, then I would ask members of the committee with questions of staff. Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Robinson. So
thank you, Mr. Mayor. When it comes to development fees, what percentage, if any, goes to ravine management, and particularly development applications which are close to or abutting designated ravine areas?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's an excellent question, and part of the capital work that we need to do going forward, one of the recommendations in this report is coming forward with a coordinated capital plan between the various divisions and agencies that are involved in the ravine, and identification of those development funds that are going in would be part of that strategy. So as an example, there may be a number of different divisions that are contributing into any one project, and portions of those may be development funded, but others may not. So do you want to add to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would just add to that from an infrastructure standpoint or servicing stormwater management point of view, Toronto Water would examine any new development and as part of that process, identify whether stormwater projects are required and whether that development would then contribute development charges. We would have to identify that stormwater project, though, in our background study. So we are reviewing that right now as we speak, because the 5-year renewal for the development charges bylaw is underway.
Would Section 42 funds be eligible for ravine upgrades or enhancements?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly they would be, and I think there are a few projects that have been done historically that have accessed some Section 42 funds.
Now, Toronto's contribution to the TRCA is about $8.3 million. How much of that can we direct to your plan, or how much can we influence its direction?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think Toronto's contribution to the TRCA is significantly more than $8.3 million. I know that Toronto Water, on top of that, alone is giving $8 to $9 million just for critical erosion sites, on top of the general contribution we provide to them. So we do meet with them regularly to talk about prioritizing the work that they have. With respect to ravines and watercourses in particular, Council's already approved a methodology for TRCA to work with Toronto Water to prioritize the work on private ravines, because as you heard earlier, there's a significant amount of land owned privately in our ravines, and TRCA takes the lead on that. On the public lands, if there's erosion and or impact to critical infrastructure, Toronto Water is the lead, and so we meet regularly with their staff to coordinate that program.
And finally, I don't know whether fire services here, but fighting fires in our ravines is quite different than fighting fires in residential areas or in high rises. Is there a strategic firefighting plan for ravine systems that are overgrown or dried out or what have you?
Once again, Mr. Mayor, the purpose of the ravine strategy is to help coordinate all the divisions and activities there too, and in the fire master plan, we'll obviously take into account the ravine study as it comes forward.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Pasternak. Councillor Robinson.
Do you have a plan to deal with, we heard it in the presentations, thank you very much. Do you have a plan to deal with individuals' backyards that are really integrated with the ravine system. Is there some way to tackle the lack of education for some of those individuals who interface so closely with the ravine?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if you're referencing properties that may actually not just abut the ravine, but actually they own properties that are the ravine.
Yes.
The Toronto Region Conservation Authority is the lead on that, and they have the provincial jurisdiction to deal with top-of-bank issues, encroachment issues, and regulate actually within that fill line. And they do regularly consult with those private homeowners. In fact, where I referenced earlier, there's a policy already approved by council on helping homeowners manage erosion issues if they are on a ravine. They do that quite regularly, and they are the point and the lead for those situations.
Okay, thank you. And I think this is maybe to the general manager of parks, but I'm not sure. Are you at all uncomfortable about the internationally recognized concept of ecological integrity? Are you okay with us trying to work toward that?
Through the mayor, I think this is one of the considerations on page 2 of under the protect categories. So we certainly have no issue with taking that into consideration in how we develop those metrics.
Okay, and it's similar to the science available through the U of T.
Sure.
The baseline information, same issues there, that you would be comfortable with us pursuing that, or?
Certainly comfortable with including that in all of the other things that we're considering when coming up with those measures.
And the Ontario Invasive Species Act?
I should say that just like anybody, we are required to comply with the Act. So that is implied in the strategy, if not said. It certainly is a requirement of all the work that we do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. I just wanted to ask about the ravine. So how does the ravine strategy fit in with neighboring municipalities? Because there's a lot of connection points, the Rouge River, Highland Creek, they all connect in with other municipalities. Can you comment a bit about how we're interacting with other municipalities and what they're doing with the ravine strategies, if any at all?
The Toronto Region Conservation Authority works with all the surrounding municipalities, and the intention of the ravine strategy, Mr. Mayor, is that all our work would be coordinated, and TRCA will actually lead a coordinating committee through all of this that deals with a lot of the protection and ecological integrity and restoration protection type of issues, and that will include the surrounding municipalities as stakeholders. We're on the receiving end of what comes down the rivers and so on.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor Tory.
Thanks, Councillor Ainsley. Any other questions from Councillor Thompson?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, through you. I wanted to understand what is the game plan, and I know that you talk a little bit about education and so on, but what is the communication plan to educate the public, particularly residents whose properties back onto a ravine? I'll give you an example. We have dealt with some erosion of shorelines and so on, and in 2005 we lost a major portion of the Birkdale Ravine. Excuse me. One of the things that we discovered was that there were many residents who cut their lawn, so they had the grass clippings, and they would actually just throw that into the ravine. And we discovered that created, obviously, moisture and allowed for the earth to seep away over time. And when we spoke to the residents about that, they were offended by the fact that that was an issue. I'm just wondering, particularly on that specific matter, how are we educating the public with respect to these concerns?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the division is working right now on a package of educational materials that will be very, very suitable and informative for private landowners. Definitely, we recognize the impact that they have on the lands behind their properties, but some of those lands are also the actual ravines themselves, and so it's very important that they understand that they are stakeholders in this.
Thank you. I understand this is a strategy in terms of moving to how we protect our ravine and how we collaborate, how we communicate, and so on. Have you sort of, and we've talked around numbers such as Section 42 funds and other mechanism of resources to fund and support the ravine. What's the quantum? What's the number? What are we talking? What if we had $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion? What would that price be?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think part of the strategy is to look at our coordinated capital plans and to try and leverage the resources that we already have that are being spent on the ravines. In terms of a dollar figure around what we would need to spend, we haven't certainly collaboratively identified that number yet, but I'll ask Mr. DiGirolamo to comment as well.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we have quantified some of the impacts of erosion and watercourse management issues. And just right now in Toronto Water's budget, for example, on Toronto Water infrastructure alone over the next 10 years, we have over $100 million allocated. We're also contributing about $93 million to the TRCA over 10 years for just erosion control sites. I could go on and on and on. So you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars to deal with just erosion. If you're going to layer on some of the other aspects of this plan, where you're looking at recreational uses, be it passive or intensive, you can add hundreds of millions again on top of that citywide.
All right, and then, so my final question through you, Mr. Mayor. Got the information about communications and alerting the public, got the numbers in terms of the work to be done in terms of dealing with erosion and so on. What is our FTE's requirement to monitor, police the ravine, ensuring that we have staff who could actually do the work that needs to be done? Would we be required to retain the services or hire new city staff to really help us to fully augment and implement a real protective plan? I realize it's a strategy and so on, but have you done that work at this point?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have not done the fullness of that work yet. That is part of the reporting back piece that we've committed to in this report. What we are doing, certainly in PF&R, to take some leadership in this is allocating one position through realigning a number of other positions that would be entirely focused on ravines and the ravine strategy to start the coordination of all that work that needs to come forward. So as far as, costs down the line, we just don't have that identified yet.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. So just with this ravine leaders, what's the plan for the makeup of the group? How are you going to select them? Are you going to use the people you've been using kind of in your stakeholder meetings already, or is it new?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess there's a number of groups that would continue through this strategy. The first is there has been a larger ravine advisory group that has been guiding the recommendations and the creation of this strategy, and I would like to thank them all. Many of them are here today. And the idea would be that group would certainly continue, and there may actually be additional advisory subgroups that would start from that group. One of the recommendations in this report is to create a ravine leaders table that would look at larger philanthropic ideas around how to move forward on a philanthropic strategy. And we would be actively recruiting certainly some of the philanthropic interests that are already involved, but also looking at additional people who would, and organizations which would want to be part of that.
And that is different from the working group for the protection?
That's correct.
And how would you pick that working group?
Well, the working group, as I mentioned, already exists, so we would continue with that group. And we would meet with those in the philanthropic world already involved in the ravine system, and through some outreach, bring some new leaders together. Certainly there has been some interest already expressed by a number of members of the community that have offered to help in that regard.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Palacio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you is my first question to forestry. In terms of the erosion, usually the ravines are at the lowest points, and with a lack of a healthy forestation plan, as we saw in some of the pictures that were shown by during the deputations. Is there a plan, do you have a plan for implementation process, let's say within the next 10 years? And if so, how that's going to proceed and the cost of it if you happen to have that info?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, a lot of erosion occurs, as I understood the question, the concern was expressed that sometimes in the understory of the trees, there's no vegetation. A lot of that problem exists because we have so many invasive species. Where you have native species and less disturbed soils, there's always a good mix of understory. So managing the invasives is part of the strategy. That's part of the issue, bigger issue that we need to deal with. Some of the slopes, though, throughout the city are what we call supernatural. That's to say they're exaggerated. They're steeper than they were originally because they've got a lot of fill on them. That's just a reality of what we've got because of the way the city was built and where the ravines were used as a dumping ground. And so our task is to try and find some of the longer-term stabilization techniques and strategies, and I'll turn that over to Mr. DiGeronimo.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, there's some erosion that's naturally occurring. Some of our creeks, when we complete our studies, we note that they move, and most rivers and creeks will move over time. And that's a natural phenomenon. And what you need to do is protect those floodplains to allow those rivers to move. Unfortunately, in certain parts of the city, we built way too close to that movement, and that's when we run into problems, because we will have then, over the years, built up, you'll see a lot of gabion baskets. You saw them in some of the pictures. Those were older techniques that we use. They don't hold up well over time. They fail, and then you get a faster slip on that slope. So part of our efforts are to look at how do you go in there, harden those areas where we've already caused a lot of damage, repair it, but what we leave behind is much more natural looking, better for aquatic habitat, and can withstand the test of time and some of the major storms that we're seeing now. So it's a blend of vegetative plantings, managing the existing forest, and then fixing what was built in the past that cannot withstand what's going on today.
A follow-up to that answer. There are hundreds of property owners that they keep on paving the driveways and literally parking lots, and adjacent to these ravines, where of course all the runoffs will end up and to the lowest point, creating further erosion. Is there any plans? Do we have any percentage of properties that have totally probably paved and they are not in compliance with environmentally friendly solutions that we have in other parts of the city?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do not have any details on the specifics of properties that have paved over and what's the percentage now of paved versus green. That kind of information is very difficult to generate in the city. We did look at that previously in Toronto Water when we were looking at some of the stormwater issues that we were managing. What we try to do is continue to encourage homeowners to manage the runoff on their property. We do have statistics on the downspout disconnection, which is part of that solution, so it doesn't just run off on the roadway. Get it to stay on your property. Overall, we're at about 79% disconnection rate in general. Some wards are better than others. And so what we try to do is keep reminding homeowners, just pushing the water off your property as quickly as you can causes problems in the city if we all do it. It's about each of us managing our various components along the way.
My last question. Would it be feasible perhaps to create a set of guidelines or recommendations that moving forward for properties that usually they continue graying all those spaces, maybe just to have some guidelines that will encourage them just to maintain at least a percentage of green space as opposed to pay the whole thing?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, those policies would have to be looked at through potentially property standards bylaws or zoning bylaws. So it's a different set of laws that we'll have to look at, rather than the bylaws that Toronto Water deals with. I deal with what goes into the pipe, and I can manage it that way. But there are other bylaws we should be looking at to achieve what you're talking about.
Thank you. I think that brings us to the end of questions of staff, and so we'd be ready to move to speakers. And first up, I see Councillor Perks, Councillor Davis, and so we'll start there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I want to begin by acknowledging the very hard work, both by staff from so many departments, but also from members of the community. Our ravines are very well loved. It's where I learned how to ride a bike, which, you know, I know is of no general benefit to the city, but it's just a nice anecdote. And they're loved by millions. They're loved by hundreds of thousands of Torontonians, and I'm glad to see this work moving forward. As someone though who did study environmental sciences and policy at the University of Toronto, I'm concerned that we haven't done a thorough. We don't have as good information now as we did a generation ago on the state of ecological health of our ravines. And while yes, some work has been done, the standard is not the same. And that's a shame, given both that ecological thinking is now more advanced, but also the stresses on those ecosystems are much greater, both with population growth and with the wider swings we see in our local climate as a result of changes in the global climate. And I'm concerned that you know, the University of Toronto Forestry Department has had to take it on itself to do some of that work. So I strongly encourage you to look for a better partnership and to do that baseline work first. We would never approve the construction of a new bridge unless engineers had told us whether or not the footings were in the right place. The same thing is true of adding intensive uses in our ravines without properly understanding what's happening with invasive species, what's happening in changes in precipitation patterns, what's happening in changes with runoff, what's happening in changes within more intensive use. You simply need that baseline first before you make other decisions. Saying that you'll have a table where you'll consider many things together is cart and horse backwards. You need to know what you need to know where your ecological vulnerabilities are first. And you know, and that's why I'm delighted that the University of Toronto, and there are other educational institutions in the Greater Toronto area who could perhaps partner as well, have stepped forward. I mean, and frankly, I'm disappointed we don't do more in partnership with the University of Toronto. I mean, you know, other than the city manager's occasional and incredibly enlightening speeches at the Monk Centre, I don't think we do enough. And this is an opportunity where they've come forward and volunteered. So I really do hope the Executive Committee takes those recommendations and puts them into effect with some motions that go on to Council, because we have an opportunity to do something important for the ravines. And as a final thought, the thing to remember about those ravines is no amount of money can buy them. It doesn't matter how much public money we put into improving the City of Toronto, you couldn't create this. It doesn't matter how many dollars you are. It's not like Rail Deck Park. It's something that we are lucky stewards of, where if we are smart and wise and plan accordingly, we will have forever. But if it's something we're not smart and wise about and we don't plan for it now, we'll lose them and we will never, ever be able to replace them. Simply having green grass growing on the side of a hill with a trail running through it does not replicate the incredible gift we have in this city, which is our ravine network. And that's why I think it's so important that we do the ecological baseline work first before we make further plans in them.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Davis.
Thank you very much. I too want to thank all of the people who love our ravines, and that's why you're here today. That's why you use them every day, and I know you care deeply about preserving them for the future. So thank you, and to all of our staff who have brought forward, I think, a very thorough and comprehensive report on how we move forward to achieve the goals that I think we share and are reflected in the principles of the report. Number one, to protect. Number two, to invest. Number three, to partner. And four, to celebrate. And I think those are ranked because the number one priority has to be to protect our ravines. They are our green lungs. They are what make Toronto so special. We are renowned for these ravines that are within our wonderful watersheds across this city. We have taken them for granted for far too long, and I'm so glad that we have a coordinated approach across all divisions to make sure that we are addressing them in a systemic way in the City of Toronto. And I know there will be others who will say the same thing, but we aren't the plan, which is going to identify 10 priority neighborhoods to address over the next 10 years, just isn't ambitious enough. And I understand why. I understand why our staff don't bring forward more forward-looking and more aggressive plans, because we have many of them that once they go through the grind of the budget process end up never being implemented, or portions that are never implemented. So they're bringing forward what is a prudent approach with some limited number of implementation strategies. Now, I do want to say that I am very pleased that we are going to, I'm very pleased with the actual approach, which is the segments of the ravine system are being identified. We're going through a process of prioritizing them, and then there will be a very intensive look both to establish the ecological baseline and to look at how we actually coordinate the work for future improvements in those areas. I think you're carving them off in manageable chunks, and that is an approach we have to take if we're going to do each chunk and each watershed and each ravine thoroughly and well. We just have to do it faster. I do have to say I'm thrilled that the Taylor-Massey Creek study and the geomorphic study that Toronto Water is doing, that is kind of the backbone of our planning, is going to go forward separately or ahead of these next 10. But I have to say at 3:37, thank you, that I probably am not alone when I expressed my original views when I brought forward the first motion to say, let's look at how these departments coordinate, that it's very frustrating that we have Toronto Water doing one thing, you have natural environments doing another, you have forestry doing another, recreation doing something else, parks doing something else, and they were not talking to each other, at least in a way that we saw or in a way that the public saw. And so often we struggle to figure out who's going to fix this, who has ultimate responsibility for making sure that everything that's going on in that wonderful ravine park and in that wonderful natural environment is the responsibility of somebody who's looking at all of the parts. So for the very first time, I think, we've put together a strategy that will make sure every division is coming together to coordinate not just the capital plans, I hope, but also the operating budgets that will govern the kinds of improvements we may want to see in our parks. I am worried about the Conservancy model. I believe that our natural environment should remain firmly in public hands and firmly a public asset that we alone have the responsibility to preserve. Fundraising is a different matter, and obviously we welcome some fundraising. But we have to raise taxes if we're going to pay to make sure that we achieve the kinds of priorities we want to protect these very special elements in our city of Toronto.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I had, that was all I had on my speakers list. Are there other members of the council visiting us today who'd like to speak to this? Councillor Carroll, no? Okay, then we can move to members of the committee, and I had Councillor Robinson's hand up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I have motions I'd like to put forward that aren't overly exciting, but I think need to be highlighted. And I just want to start by thanking the excellent deputations and speakers that we had today. You all did a great job, well researched and well presented. So thank you for taking the time to do the legwork involved in making your presentations. These are the motions I want to move. I've cleared this with staff, as well as I spoke to the chair of Parks and Environment, Councillor McMahon, about it. She also is a supporter of these, so I hope you'll support them as well. And I think they're self-explanatory. I'm not going to go through them, but it's what we heard from our friends at U of T today, or from the U of T submission. And these are things that are partially in the report, but also an opportunity to highlight them through these motions. I want to be very brief because time is ticking, but I want to say bravo to all the city staff involved in this strategy. They've done an excellent job. And I want to actually say that I think this I can't say that word. Thank you. Piece, I think it's in, I forget what appendix it is. I think it's table 2 in the report. The fundraising and working on having this example of an arm's length not-for-profit is the way forward for City Hall. We can't do it all. We can't do it all well. I think staff would agree with me. Looking at organizations like Evergreen, the Toronto Botanical Gardens, these are stellar organizations. They're best practices. They work effectively, efficiently. They're lean operations, and they're experts in what they do. So I think this conservatory is not the right word, conservancy, thank you, Councillor Pasternak, model is an excellent one, and I'm very happy to see that highlighted by staff in this report on table 2. I also want to thank staff, because it's a shout out to staff, because we don't often see this, but I was very happy to see that they're trying to kind of retain the financial impacts, and that while they're asking for or they're assigning one permanent position in parks to this, they're not asking for a new FTE. Instead, they're reallocating an internal staffer to this role, and I think that's very impressive that they've come forward and saying, we're going to continue to work on this within our complement. So I want to thank staff for that, and for overall a great step forward on the ravine strategy. I think it's such an important piece of work.
Thanks, Councillor Robinson. I had Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. And I am very impressed, but it's no surprise, the love for our ravines, especially with everyone waiting around all day inside where there are no trees, this cool chamber, to discuss your passion for the forest. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. What I like about the ravine strategy, thanks staff. Oh, I have a motion. Motion, thank you. Here I am. So you heard from Outward Bound today that they would like to explore this concept. It's for youth, not-for-profit youth groups, small groups, leave no trace camping. So let's just, I'm just asking for a report for that. So I love your support on that. What I like about the ravine strategy staff is I love the ravine leaders. I love the protection working group. the stakeholder group that's been working so hard. I love the Ravines Trust. That's a new thing. That's what we have to look forward to. We need to think about groups or that kind of scenario for funding our parkland, as we will for Rail Deck Park once that rolls out. I love the outreach to your key stakeholders, and you have a whole group of, selection of stakeholders. You have all these fantastic grassroots volunteer groups. You have big philanthropists, Ken Tannenbaum. You have great park people. You have Evergreen, Andy Chisholm. You have Toronto Botanical Gardens. So it's just phenomenal who all you've reached out to, and the passion and collective genius with these groups. The collaboration of departments, I have to tell you this, and Lou DeGeronimo, Council Parks, Lou needs to hear this story. You know, so often City Hall gets slagged for people working in silos, and I went to one of those breakfast think tank meetings, and this is how great Lou DeGeronimo from Toronto Water, Janie from PFNR, and Jennifer Kiesman, who's not here, and I think Transportation Services was involved, how well they worked together. So Jennifer Kiesman was late, and so Janie did Jennifer's slideshow, and Jennifer did Janie's, and it went off seamlessly. Like, it was just incredible. And so you guys have worked so hard together to create this fantastic strategy. It's very important, as we know, our ravines, we're darn lucky to have our ravines system in this city. It's unique, probably the only place in the world that has these ravines. It is going to help us combat climate change. It's too bad Houston didn't have the ravines, but we are darn lucky. And so it's great that we are, Richard Ubbins is allocating a city staffer to this, and we are going to look at other funding models. We don't want what's happened in the U.S. to happen up here. We want to preserve, protect, respect, and appreciate our ravines. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. And I want to start my remarks by welcome everybody. This is National Forest Week. So I think it's a really appropriate time to be looking at a ravine strategy as we celebrate National Forest Week. So happy National Forest Week to everybody. I'm going to be supporting the recommendations in this report, and I want to thank staff for all the work they did, all the consultations that they put into this. I also sit on the board of directors of the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, and we had a presentation on the ravine strategy last week, and there were some questions about it from my colleagues, and some concerns were raised, and staff addressed them, and at the end the strategy was unanimously endorsed by the Toronto Region and Conservation Authority. And it's a draft strategy, and I think that's important to remember because staff will be taking the input that they got from the deputants today, the motions that were put forward, and I think that's very important to realize that they've got a timeline and goals and benchmarks to be met, and I think it respects our ravines. And as a city councillor from Scarborough, often we get comments about how beautiful our ravines are in Scarborough, that you can walk through them. The Highland Creek Ravine, I'll think of Mayor Tory, that I often get comments from people that go through that, and they don't even know that they're in the middle of the largest city in Canada. And we do have issues. Some of that was brought up, and there's a mention of the state of good repair that is an ongoing issue and a concern. And then we've had competing visions over the years about how we deal with conservation in our creeks and the ravines, but I think that that's starting to be well addressed by this ravine strategy. And once again, I want to thank staff for all their hard work and the deputants for coming in today to address their concerns that I know will be incorporated within the ravine strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I too want to lend my voice to this, not only because my property backs onto actually is part of a ravine, but the fabulous work that the staff have done is really important, and I want to thank everyone involved I just want to speak to the value and the beauty of the ravine. Simply, as I said, Mr. Mayor, that my house backs onto a ravine, and I basically can sit on my my deck, and I'm feeling the breeze from the trees and so on. But more importantly, residents in the community are able to traverse and walk and do many interesting things. We most recently put a new state-of-the-art play facility at the very eastern part of the Birkdale Ravine, which is bordering on Brimley Road. And it is so extremely well utilized by parents and young people. And what has happened is that just to the, I guess, the southern portion, we planted sequoia trees not too long ago with our sister city, Sagamihara, and we've had delegations from Japan coming in and visiting and seeing it, and they're totally blown away by what we've actually done. But we've actually been doing a lot of work in the ravine. We have interpretive boards that talks about the types of species that are there for the young people in the community to be able to come and understand what is there and the value of it and so on. So I speak of the benefit because I see it, live it, breathe it. My children are able to benefit from it, and all the kids in the neighborhood and the seniors in the neighborhood, everyone is absolutely happy that we have this prestigious ravine. However, we've had challenges as well. We've had to attempt to educate many in the community about throwing not only garbage, but the grass clipping and other materials in the ravine areas. And we've seen the negative impact of some of these activities in terms of the receding shorelines. We've seen the impact in 2005 when we had an amazing rainstorm where people's backyard had washed away because of the way the culvert was angling into their properties and so on, and we've responded to shoring it up and so on. And the people in the community are very, very happy the work that our staff have been doing. But we know that, as we've seen in the report and the recommendations, some of the challenges that have been identified here, we've experienced it as well. There is a necessity, there's a need to ensure that we not only protect the ravine in essence, but also to commit ourselves to sustainable development in terms of our willingness to invest in the necessary work that needs to be done. Mr. DiGeronimo has identified approximately, he talks about a combination between water and the TRCA, for approximately $200 million. And that's a small number in terms of the amount of ravines that we actually have in this city that needs our attention. And I think that based on what we have from staff with respect to our strategy and so on in terms of building forward, we need to build this into the budget envelope, that an effort to actually do the remediation, do the work that needs to be done, but we actually have to invest. And I'm a little concerned that I've been told that we are going to basically use an FTE that's already in place for this, because sometimes our staff tend to burn themselves out with the number of activities, number of work, requirements that they have to do. So I want to make sure that this person who is going to be utilized for that is hopefully given the necessary time to be able to provide focus and attention on this, and at the same time that we do not simply look at this report and say it's a great report, that we're actually going to commit ourselves to actually doing something relating to this. And then finally, having been there when Councillor Davis was moving her motion, and how at the time, Councillor Davis, I have to admit, I didn't really get it at the time. But I have to tell you, obviously, over time, I've got it, and I got it now, because not only do I live, my property backs onto a ravine, I experience, and my neighbors and many people in the community come and experience and so on. I want to thank you for the outstanding effort, because at the time, there were a number of us who really didn't get it. And I think now we fully get it, along with the staff information and so on. So, Mr. Mayor, I know that you're committed to this, and we're all committed to making a difference. I want to thank the public and members who've come out to speak to us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Any other speakers? I will simply say, without taking any time, thank you to all the staff that have done a huge piece of work long before I got here started, and I know that does include Councillor Davis and other members of council who've worked on this for a long time. I think it's extremely important work, and it moves us a step forward, and we'll have to take it forward from here to actually get it done. But I just want to say thank you. So we have some motions. Number one, which I'll put in front of you, amendment number one, moved by Councillor Robinson, is in front of you now. And if you're ready for the question, I'll ask for all those in favor of Councillor Robinson's amendment. Opposed? Carried. Then we move to motion number two, amendment number two, which is Councillor McMahon's concerning leave no trace camping. I'll ask for all those in favor. Opposed? Carried. Item as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the members of the public who took part in the discussion. We'll try to do justice to all the comments that you made. I think you could even see in some of the amendments that were just made some things that we heard from you that are now incorporated into this policy, and that was very good. Thank you very much. All right.
Mayor Tory?
Yes. Yes, you want to deal with that one matter, Councillor Shiner?
Yes, I just wanted to release one matter that I had held earlier, which is item 27.12, citywide real estate.
And you're just releasing it?
Just releasing.
All right, so that's 27.12, ladies and gentlemen on the committee. 27.12 is being released. Councillor Shiner held it, and it's a real estate.
Get a recorded vote on that, please.
Want a recorded vote? Sorry, what was that again? All right, yeah, if we could just have order here, we're going to keep going. We've got lots left to do. 27.12, we're ready to call the question because Councillor Shiner has released it. Unless there were any questions of staff, any speeches that were to be made. Otherwise, I'll ask for all those in favor. It's a recorded vote that's been asked for.
On the recommendations in the report on EX 27.12, all those in favor, Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Crawford, Councillor DeGiorgio, Councillor McMahon, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, Mayor Tory, Councillor Palacio, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Shiner, and Councillor Thompson. The recommendations carry unanimously.
Thank you. That would bring us then next to 27.9,
Mayor Tory?
And it was being held.
Sorry, Mayor Tory.
I'm sorry, Councillor Ainsley.
I'd like to release number 28.
28.
I had my questions answered by staff.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, there's just a lot of buzz going on in here, and it's just very difficult to hear. 27.28, did you say?
Yes.
Which is the official plan amendment, status of city subcommittee actions. And were there any questions of staff, any speakers on that? Otherwise, if Councillor Ainsley is releasing it, I can just call the question. 27.28, it's coming on the recommendation of the Board of Exhibition Place. All those in favor?
Mayor Tory?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Could we just change the word where it says direct the chief planner to request the chief planner? I would move that as the acting chief planner has a very long schedule of items that they're dealing with, and they report on their work plan to council, and I'd like to...
Councillor Shiner has moved an amendment, which we'll just incorporate into the motion, and I'll ask for all those in favor of the City Council request the chief planner. Otherwise, it's as is. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Then we move next to EX 27.9, regularizing Toronto for All public education initiative to support civic resiliency, and we had a speaker on that, a deputant, Carolyn Bezic. Not here. We know for sure. Carolyn Bezic, going once, going twice. All right. Were there any questions of staff? Any speeches to be made? All right. Hearing none, then I'll ask the question. I'll call the question again on 27.9. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 27 point is the next 2711. Stand. 27.11 is next, and we have on that the title of the. Sorry, I just have misplaced my agenda here, but I want to be able to read the title. There it is. Sorry, it's here. 2711 commuter parking options, Toronto York Spadina subway extension. We have one deputant, Roman Baber. Is it Baber? B-A-B-E-R, Baber? Yes. Yeah, you're up, sir. For your deputation. May I have help with the pronunciation of your name so I don't mispronounce it again? It's from Baber. Fine, I had it right the first time. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, Mr. Baber. And you're speaking on this parking matter 27.11, and you have 5 minutes.
I'm also a resident in Toronto. For purposes of full disclosure, I am a candidate with one of the provincial parties, but I am appearing today as a resident to speak to this issue. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak. I live at Ellen Road and Shepherd at the meeting place between wards 8, 9, and 10. And I'm here to speak respectfully against the receipt of the September 12th report tendered before you, and more generally against the proposed closure of the parking lot at Shepherd West Station and the 632 spots contained therein. This is, of course, in addition to the partial loss at Wilson Station and an additional loss of parking space planned for Yorkdale Station. First to the report. In my letter to you of yesterday's date, a copy of which is filed as an exhibit, I suggested to you that the report tendered by staff before you today does not cite any consultation with local residents, and the assumption that the lot is used primarily by Vaughan residents is not supported by data. In fact, no concrete data has been assembled in connection with the proposal, and I submit to you respectfully that the report is premature. I note that in your meeting of January 31st, 2017, as item 2119, the city asked the manager, and I quote from page 2 of the report, to provide commuter feedback on the commuter parking needs along the new Spadina University line. At page 4 of the report before you today, staff provides that it undertook consultation process with a number of stakeholders. They include TTC, Build Toronto, local councillors, Canada Lands, TPA, CycleTO, and WalkTO. Visibly absent from the study are commuters and local residents, the people that actually use this parking lot, the people that you have instructed staff to speak to with respect to the closure of the Shepherd West parking lot have not been consulted. Now, you remember going back to the Mayor Miller days, the closure was predicated on 2 suggestions. Number 1, the lot is underutilized. Number 2, users of the lot do not live in Toronto. They come from Vaughan or elsewhere. And now, they'll have additional parking along the Spadina extension. Well, with respect, the first suggestion that the lot is underutilized is erroneous. I overlook this parking lot every day from my apartment, and the parking lot at the Shepherd West Station is filled to capacity every weekday, and it is almost at capacity every weekend. The second proposition, with respect to the makeup of the residents that use the parking lot, is unreliable because there's no data behind it. The lot is widely used by residents of wards 8, 9, and 10, and in particular, residents of Ward 10 that live between Wilson and Finch and Bathurst to Dufferin. So, at the very least, this committee must insist that it's going to carry forward with major policy. It does so on reliable data. Given the foregoing, with respect, I suggest to you that the receipt of this report is premature, and to make a call about a decision that was made in 2009, further study is required. Now to the greater point. The lot makes the subway accessible to local residents who drive to the subway. Some people may not be inclined to walk 5 to 10 minutes to the bus, wait 5 to 10 minutes for the bus, and then take you to the bus station, especially in the winter. Eliminating the lot may drive, pun intended, commuters to take their car all the way downtown, and that will create more gridlock. We'll certainly have more congestion at Ellen Road and more congestion in Eglinton. So why not continue to make it easy for people to get on the subway? And this is in line with city policy. In fact, at page 3 of the report, staff quotes city policy, which provides commuter parking lots are provided to encourage commuters to utilize the subway system, close quote. So city policy recognizes that lots encourage the use of subway. Making the subway less accessible will make people use the subway less. It's just that simple. If the intended effect of closing the lot is to have less cars on the road, then regretfully, by closing the lot, we may have the opposite effect and have more cars on the road. Mr. Chair, Councilman, I see that my time is almost up. I asked for maybe another 60 seconds or so, if I may.
I'll give you 30 seconds.
A couple more points. The Shepherd lot is not being transferred to Build Toronto. There are no plans for the lot. Second of all, with the closures and the surplus, even though we're expanding to 6 new subway stations, we're going to have close to 500 spots less, 488 spots less. By keeping the lot open, we will actually have a surplus of spot, which makes sense because we're creating additional capacity. The TTC needs the revenue. There's about $160,000 worth of revenue generated by the lot.
Mr. Beber, I'm going to have to stop you now.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thanks for your deputation. Any questions? Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Here. Outside councillors, would that?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
Okay.
Do you have any questions from outside?
I'll defer if you want me. I can go after.
Pardon? No.
Okay, thank you. I had asked the staff to circulate some pictures. I'm not sure if they were done. Did the deputy also get one?
Sorry, do you have any questions?
I have questions, but I want to ask the deputy a specific question on the picture that has been circulated.
All right, do you have the picture?
Yes, the staff has it right now.
I have the picture, Deputy Mayor.
Do you want to put it on the screen, right over there, on that? Other side, flip it over.
Turn around.
Unless it's a polar bear in a snowstorm.
No.
Can you turn it a bit? Nope, try again, just 90 degrees. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair to the deputy, thank you very much for coming. There's a picture that you're showing. I think this is a picture that was taken from a balcony overlooking the parking lot. Would that be correct?
That would be correct. And in fairness and in interest of disclosure, I took that picture. This is, in fact, was this morning at approximately 8:30 in the morning.
Can you please describe the parking lot? Is it empty? Is it filled? Is it vacant?
The parking lot at issue is filled to capacity. There's not a single spot available at the parking lot.
So if I'm not mistaken, if you took that picture this morning, you overlooked the parking lot on a usual basis?
Correct. I look at the parking lot every day.
Has there been an issue that at any given time you've seen the parking lot empty?
I never see the parking lot empty during weekdays. On weekends, I would suggest that the parking lot is filled to 3/4 of a capacity.
So this is a parking lot that has a lot of uses, a parking lot that has a lot of income for the city.
By my calculation, at least $160,000 at $5 a car, 632 spots.
Okay, so this is a parking lot that if it's gone, the people that live in the immediate vicinity, yourself and others, will be having some difficulty because they'll find no parking space to park.
In fact, that area has seen major intensification by the city. Shepherd Avenue has grown immensely. There are a lot of mid-rises, and then there's also a lot of development around Bathurst Manor, Clanton Park, and so these two particular communities like to avail themselves of this parking lot. Not having this parking lot will force these communities and the new communities that are being added to find other means to get to the subway, and the concern is that they will opt to drive all the way downtown instead of taking the bus to the subway.
How long will it take you to get the bus or the subway to, from the subway there downtown? How long will it take if you were to come down here?
So I can tell you, on a good day, assuming the subway runs smoothly and there are no issues, from Shepherd West to Union Station is approximately 25 to 30 minutes.
And if you were to drive?
If you were to drive during that hour, you'd probably be looking at an hour at least, and that's on a good day.
So this would be an extra 600 cars that will be added to the congestion coming downtown?
At the very least.
Okay, thank you. Anything else that I forgot to ask that you might want to add?
Well, what I might say is that at the very least, if council was looking for commuter feedback, then it did not get commuter feedback in this report, and it's essential that it predicates a decision that was made by previous government 8 years ago on current data. And generally speaking, if you want commuters to rely on the Red Rocket, then why not make the Red Rocket more accessible?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Roman, for coming in today. One thing that occurs when we see these staff reports about parking spot losses and parking spot additions, they move the numbers around like a moving target to the various subway stations, arguing over a period of time that the net loss is going to be about 488 spaces. What appears to you to be the misguided analogy of really just replacing spots that are being taken away at another location? What is the real issue, the backstory to all of that?
There are a couple of issues. First of all, there is a use issue whereby commuters that lose space at Yorkdale or Wilson will now have to drive north, either potentially to Finch West or to Dansview Park, which may or may not happen, also depending on what's going to happen with the park. And so for a lot of commuters that live south of Shepherd, it'll be very inconvenient. And not only that, they'll have to drive significantly west out of the way in order to park. But Councillor Pasternak, specifically to the numbers don't really make sense given that we have a major extension. So staff is alerting council to the fact that we have expanded capacity on the Spadina line on line 1 by 6 stations. Nonetheless, after all the additions and all the subtractions, we're going to end up with 488 spots less in total. So my suggestion to you, Councillor Pasternak, is that if the Shepherd West slot were to remain open, then that would give us a net surplus of 150 spots as opposed to a loss of 488 stops. But I mean, again, given that with the signal being upgraded, with the subway going to Vaughan, we anticipate significant uptick in the number of riders and in the number of drivers that may want to drive to the subway. And so respectfully, I would suggest that policy of this council should be to increase the number of parking spots instead of decreasing it.
One group that has been calling are those who continue to drive but carry a handicapped parking pass. And they park at the lot, and then they obviously walk to the subway. So they're physically able to continue to drive and to use the subway. What will happen to them if they can no longer park at a subway stop? And these people, once again, carry a handicap.
I think, Councillor Pasternak, you raised a very important issue. And specifically to that question, the Shepherd West subway station is very accessible. It's located in an open field, it's very large, and it has a significant number of handicapped spots. I would suggest to you that if we made it harder for commuters that require special accommodations to drive themselves to the subway, then there may be greater reliance on Wheels Transit, just compounding to the city's costs. So I think this is not only a human rights issue, this is also a financial issue, but I have to tell you, I can't conceptualize precisely where the accessibility spots are, so I don't want to mislead you on that issue, but you raise a very important issue.
I guess the other thing is the revenue. I think TTC always tells us how cash-starved they are. That lot alone, I guess, was 632 spots. I know it was a little over $3,000 a day.
Right.
In revenue. I guess that can add up over a year.
It can add up over a year. So I think conservatively it adds up to about 160,000. But in addition to that revenue, there's prospects for more revenue from that parking lot, specifically because immediately adjacent to the parking lot, on the east side of the parking lot, the city has planned retail and commercial development. And that development may be served by that parking lot, especially in the off hours or on weekends, and may generate additional revenue and reduce local gridlock. Right now, there is no other intended use planned for this parking lot other than closing it.
Well, my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks. Any questions? More questions from? I have one question. The idea is that I think we won't need this parking lot anymore because it won't be the end of the line of the university line. It'll get extended up. Therefore, people won't be driving down to park in this parking lot to get downtown. Is that a fair proposition?
Well,
that's why they might be looking at closing this. Is that?
But we haven't tested that proposition because we haven't done a study of who actually parks there. And the mandate proposed by council to staff was to go ahead and get commuter feedback, but right now we have no hard data as to who comes from Vaughan or who comes from Ward 9 or Ward 8. And so what I'm saying, at the very least, I would encourage council to adopt the second item, which is 2731, and instruct staff to conduct a study, an empirical data study as to who comes from the City of Toronto, who doesn't come from the City of Toronto, what is the respective makeup, and what, if any, effect that will have on residents.
And your proposition, what you're trying to persuade us is that you want us to do a study because you think people from the local wards will still need a place to park their car because they'll still need to get downtown.
Right.
And that it's, if I can finish,
My apologies.
and that it's not really helpful, Cycle TO and Walk TO and Build Toronto, first of all, some of them would be naturally opposed to cars just generally, and a number of these other stakeholders don't have any visibility in the issue at all, and that the actual commuters are not on the stakeholder list.
Deputy Mayor, you're correct. So not only a couple of issues that you've touched on. It's not just that local residents may not have a place to park because we're closing because council proposes to close the Shepherd West subway lot. Unfortunately, local residents are also suffering from the closure of half of the Wilson lot and an eventual loss of about 1,000 spots at the Yorkdale lot. So this will disadvantage, fortunately or unfortunately, that has been pledged to Build TO. We have other residential and commercial development there, so that's done with. We have a loss at Yorkdale and Wilson. And so that would further exacerbate the issue for local residents. But with respect to the other stakeholders you mentioned, such as Walk TO or Bicycle TO, those will not be affected by Shepherd West. I did look at the report by Walk TO appended to the report, but there are no hazards to either cyclists or pedestrians at Downsview at the Shepherd West subway station. That area is removed from pedestrian or bicycle traffic. It is only designated for vehicles.
Questions of staff? Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Through you to staff, the agreement that we have with Yorkdale Shopping Centre, is that agreement between Oxford Properties and Toronto Parking Authority?
No, it's with the City of Toronto and Oxford Properties.
Now, normally, agreements like this, leases like this, have an option to extend or renew. Are those provisions built into this agreement?
There are no provisions in this contract, no.
Isn't it a little unusual that when you have a lease or a rental agreement that there's an option to extend?
It was a 40-year agreement, so I'm not sure that those things were built in.
Has Oxford approached the city to buy out the balance of the agreement and no longer provide commuter parking?
Not at this time. There was a proposal put to the TTC in the city about 12 to 18 months ago, but we did not pursue that because it was not deemed to be a significant offer that would offset the current demand and the financial revenue that the TTC would gain during the remainder of the term.
Now, I noticed that the Shepherd West lot is not on the list of properties of May 2009 listed. Does Build Toronto control that property at all?
So it was identified to be transferred to Build Toronto.
It's not listed as a property to be transferred in the council decisions of May of 2009. At least not in the report before us. Are you saying it was embedded in there?
So it was one of the number of properties that was to be, for the title to be transferred to Build Toronto, but I do not believe that has happened yet.
Okay. When it comes to Canada Lands, do you see them as a willing partner to work with us at the new Downsview Park station, where a GO station and a new subway station will intersect? It'll be a major transit hub with, let me just add this up, 0 commuter parking spots for that spot. Will they come to the table?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, staff have been in discussions with Canada Lands, and they have indicated their support to come to the table.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Shiner?
So the use of the parking lots and who goes there, the TTC has studied that in the past?
Not at Downsview, no. At Shepherd West, no.
The other lots?
Yes.
So there was the lots on Tippett Road, there was the lots on Wilson Heights, and there was the lots on Shepherd West. Am I correct? 3 different lots there?
There are more than 3 lots between Shepherd West and Wilson. But the ones at Wilson were studied, yes.
So when you study them, you have numbers as to whom was using the lots, whether they're local residents or they are 905 residents, when the decision was made to close the lots when the line was extended up to Highway 407?
I'm uncertain as to whether that work was done previously, but last year, a license plate...
I'm dying here.
A license plate study...
Do you have studies in any of the lots of where the cars come from?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell me what those...
Two-thirds of those license plates are resident outside of the City of Toronto.
So when you studied it in the past and you've looked and you found that 2/3 of the plates are from residents outside of Toronto that are driving to these lots?
Correct.
So that was your assumption on the recommendations to close these lots. Do you have any idea to believe that those numbers have changed?
Since the study was done a year ago, I do not believe so.
So 2/3 of the people in the lots have in the past been outside of Toronto, and it's most likely they are now. As far as, and I'm not sure who can answer this, but a confirmation on this, when a property is identified to be transferred to Build Toronto, my understanding is that the property is not transferred to them at that time because they would have to start paying property taxes on that property, which means it would be a bad decision to do that, as half of those taxes go to the school board. Mr. Rossini, you seem to be shaking your head. Am I correct?
That's correct. We first identify a property for turnover. Build Toronto works on it. When the development proposal is ready, then we do the transfer, so they don't pay.
So in saying that this was identified to be transferred to Build Toronto, that has gone through council and council has accepted that?
I'm not sure about this particular property, but there's been a list of 60 some odd properties identified for turnover. 47 have been transferred. I'm not sure where this one sits on that list.
There's been an extensive official plan amendment carried out in the lands up there. Is this not part of the official plan amendment that was taken to council and was at the board and all part of that.